Okay, Giovanni.
Okay, good morning. I see that we have already a good number of attendees connected. More are joining us. Good morning. I start probably sharing already my screen. I hope you see it, yes. Okay, so let me first of all introduce myself. I'm the director of the lab laboratory in France, hosting this online meeting, and the coordinator of the ESCAPE cluster, but I have the pleasure and the honor today of talking on behalf of the 5 science cluster and refer, EOS Life, ESCAPE PANOSC, and SHOCK. To introduce our workshop, I thought first of all to introduce what these science clusters are. The science clusters are projects that were proposed in 2018 in response to a dedicated H2020 call. 5 of these clusters are funded through this action to ensure the connection of the ESFRI research infrastructures with the European Open Science Cloud and, of course, the roadmap towards its implementation. We had to build up a work program in each cluster responding to a series of expected impact, among which improve the access to data and tools leading to new insights and innovation, facilitate access of researchers to data and resources for data-driven science, create a cross-border open innovation environment, rise the efficiency, the productivity of researchers through open data services and infrastructures for discovering, accessing, and reusing data, foster the establishment of global standards, important, develop synergies, complementarity between involved research infrastructures, and also adopt common approaches to the data management for economies of scale. And our work programs in the clusters are built to reach a scope of working together to make data fair, where, as you probably know, fair means fundable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We have been following and building up during the last couple of years an important path of cooperation and synergies. First of all, a natural and reinforced collaboration thanks to the cluster among the ESFRI research infrastructures management boards. Then an important dialogue, a structural cooperation has been initiated and supported by all of us among the science clusters board. We started up also intercluster synergies, bridging on technologies, and we are increasing in the second part of our projects these aspects. And I want to also highlight the continuous synergies that we are having with between the clusters and the European Commission, the ESFRI EOSC Task Force, and obviously the EOSC Secretariat. Let me also underline that the science cluster today are an integral part and will be an integral part for the implementation of the European Open Science Cloud. Because the clusters interpret and guide the thematic implementation of the EOS concept, their outcomes are now forming core or participate in building the core services of the emerging EOSC. Are essential and have essential and key role for the science content, the science goal of EOSC, and we also have the capacity by construction, by definition, of gathering together the concerned scientific communities. This important path of cooperation and synergies, let me highlight, has started, as I said, a couple of years ago, first of all, by discussing among us, and now today I'm really glad to inform you that we had a fortnight meeting of the boards of the clusters to even work closer in the future. And we started working also with the ESFRI task force, start responding to the surveys of the EOSC Secretariat, and it was at that time that we decided also to take an action towards in support of the mission of the EOSC Secretariat by editing a position statement from each cluster that are collected in one document. Now, one more important step was achieved with the startup of the new project, EOSC Future, where for the first time we are working together, the five clusters, in a project that is mostly driven by the pan-European e-infrastructures, but we have an important role there for the accomplishment of the implementation of EOSC. And today, we come to with the second position statement document that I will have the pleasure to highlight towards the end of the workshop concerning the expectations and long-term commitments of clusters in open science. This first science cluster workshop aims at addressing an outlook for the future. An introduction to the programs of the science clusters, their current structural value, their present future collaboration actions will be presented by each cluster. Potential paths to consolidate the cluster work program and sustain EOSC is one more aim of the workshop. And then presenting and with further discussion organized in a closed section during the afternoon with the European Commission, the EOSC Association, the ESFRI boards for a longer term vision to support open science in Europe. By the way, I would like to say something that is important also for the glossary. We used to say ESFRI science clusters. There are three distinct objects. ESFRI is the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructure. When we talk and when we write in our document ESFRI and other research infrastructures, we mean a set of domain-based pan-European that are in the roadmap of ESFRI as project or landmarks and other world-class research infrastructures. Therefore, the ESFRI label that we use, ESFRI Science Cluster, means that current 5 H2020 project supported by consortium of scientists from research infrastructure, from university, from research institutes. The label is just to recall that there is a commitment also of the ESFRI research infrastructure legal entities as it was requested originally by the European Commission. In this infographic, you see, you have the pleasure to see our faces of the speakers of this day, including Silvana Muscella, who will be the chair of this section. Let me introduce Silvana, is the CEO of TrustIT Services, also a member of the EOSC Secretariat, partners of a couple of our clusters. She has a long experience in ICT communication, innovation, standards, and will tell us more in a while about the organization of the workshop. But let me come to the conclusion. To start with, we are happy to count on the presence of Kostas Grinos, for an overview talk about the open science, terms, ambition, challenges in Europe. Kostas Grinos leads the unit in charge of open science in the Directorate General for Research Innovation at European Commission. He has a huge experience in EU policy, managing R&D programs in the area of science. And I wish to acknowledge, before concluding, that the science cluster had and are having constantly fruitful dialogue and cooperation with European Commission, DG RTD and DG Connect, and especially with Kostas Klinos and his team, producing a series of useful reflections, actions, and we learn always a lot about policies and how to work together for excellent science in Europe. We also have the opportunity to tell Kostas and his team about the diversity of the scientific research world and how the research is evolving in time. And above all, don't forget that this workshop is also a fruit of such a cooperation inspired by Kostas, who proposed to have one of our periodical meeting in an open format, and this is the results. So I leave the floor to Silvana to take the chairing, and once again to welcome you all, and Kostas Klinos, who will be our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you all, and welcome again. I'm very happy to be supporting this morning's session. Before passing the floor to Kostas, some housekeeping. We will be recording today's workshop. The idea is that the 5 clusters will have time to present their achievements to date with a short Q&A, so do take advantage of that within the time allocated. Just a few words. I'd like to congratulate the 5 clusters who've worked in putting together this second position statement you saw from Giovanni. There was the first one. If you haven't seen it, please do download it. It's on the Indigo shared document space that Matilda and Julie have been uploading with various other important pieces of information. The presentations will be there too at the end of the workshop as well. We wanted to also underline that behind each cluster, we know that there are a significant number of research infrastructures, Giovanni's already mentioned them, bound by their ESFRI roadmap, and each have specific mandates with their member state countries and have different sustainability models, some quite challenging, and we know that one size doesn't fit all. And we know that RIs also have to cater for their long tail of science communities. So I think when you see the different presentations today and the explosion of different services, fair RI data resources, data catalogs, tools, and other applications, I think it's an example of relevant contributions, very relevant, between domains, which is key and crucial as the interface between scientific communities, their infrastructures, and to EOS, where the multidisciplinary research aspect is absolutely key, and you're going to see that too. I'd also like to pass a reflection to our participants, very many today, so thank you very much for joining. And to see, as we're on the verge of the publication of the Horizon Europe programme this June, how can we see that these science clusters could perhaps play a prominent or significant role in part of the European data strategy and in the European data spaces. So this is a reflection for all of us to think about. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor to Kostas with his initial presentation. Over to you, Kostas. Thank you very much. And all of you, enjoy this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvana. Thank you all for organizing this workshop and for inviting me to speak. I like events that are targeted, focused, that have a purpose, and I think this issue that the issues that we will be discussing of that sit in between data infrastructures and services, and what is generic and what is area specific or domain specific, are some of the most important issues that need discussion for getting the strategy for EOS to the future. How do I do with the presentation, Silvana? You said that there will be, you will project it, right? But you will give me the ability to change the slides or something like this?
Indeed, yes. I think, Rita, are you opening that now?
So
Super.
To do do that, I kindly ask you to click at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You may find a button called Share Screen. I think this is how it is written in English, sharing screen.
So I should share the presentation.
You want, I think
You said you will share a PDF.
we did, yes.
Okay, there are two options. You can either present from your own computer, but the other option would be we can do for you.
Let us do that, Rita. So why don't you present?
Yes,
Lovely.
and
Great.
I'll do that.
Okay, I can start speaking still till the slides come on screen. There it is. And how do I change slides?
I need to tell me to do that. So just say next and I'll change the slide for you.
Ah, okay. Silvana was saying that you have another system by which you project a PDF, and the speaker changes the slides himself or herself. Okay, but we have the traditional system now. Good. So again, good morning, everybody. I will make you a presentation on open science. I'm apologize if many of you have already seen this presentation or parts of this presentation, because of course we have presented it in many places. It is, I have 20 minutes, I think. That's right, Silvana?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So open science as the new modus operandi for research. Next one, please. Why we need open science? So what is open science? Open science, we define it as a way of doing research. We don't define it as the outputs of research being simply open. We define it as a way of doing research. And in this process of doing research, you share as much as possible and as early as possible. And you share not only with your colleagues, but with researchers at large, and not only with researchers in your own domain, but researchers in other disciplines. So we see open science as facilitating cross-disciplinary research. And you do it by sharing also with citizens and society. And why do we like open science? It's not because it's a nice idea only, but we think that open science is more efficient, is higher quality science, it's more reliable, robust, results in better reproducibility. It is in part thanks to more scrutiny of the results because the results are open. But also it's science that is more responsive to social demands because the involvement of the societal actors, citizens, civil society organizations, and therefore due to all this, better robustness, better reproducibility, better involvement of societal actors, that it's science more trusted by society. And with COVID-19, which is an entirely different discussion, but we saw an illustration of this. We saw how open science came to the fore very poignantly by many actors because of the necessity to work fast and effectively, efficiently to develop vaccines, therapeutics, and policy approaches for the pandemic. Next one, please. So what do we do practically regarding open science in the Commission? And this is not an exhaustive list. We try to improve the practice of research and innovation. Firstly, open access to scholarly publications. This is the most established, but not achieved, not succeeded yet, not entirely. We're making progress, but it is the most established area of activity since 2005 or so. We do whatever we can, for example, in the new program Horizon Europe, to enable the early sharing of all research outputs, not only data, but also any other output, including the software and workflows and models and so on. We try to have all data now produced fair I'm not going to explain this. I think everybody is well familiar. Giving a lot of emphasis in research data management. We have a new area of activity for the last year or two, which is reproducibility, because to see how we can address the so-called quote-unquote reproducibility crisis. And we engage also in activities towards bringing in civil society organizations and citizens, either to design our research programs at the commission level, like the 10 missions, for instance, or to involve them in projects, encourage their involvement in projects, or to have them as citizen scientists, or at the end only as the targets of science communication done by the researchers in Europe. So these are the kind of practices of research innovation, and I could add several more. On the other hand, for this practice to be successful, you need an appropriate environment. And there we need an infrastructure that supports all these activities of open science, which we call this European Open Science Cloud. But from this, you understand also that, at least from our point of view, we don't see EOSC as simply a data infrastructure. We see it as an infrastructure that can support everything that needs to be supported for open science to take hold and succeed. Everything, of course, is today, or almost everything, is a digital object, and therefore handling a data set is not so different from handling a piece of software or from handling whatever else is a publication, for example. Then we have the appropriate skills and education, and these skills need to exist also in researchers, but not every researcher can be a digital expert. So we need also skills as services being provided at the level of the institution, of the university, for example, to help researchers face the challenges that in data annotation, in data storage, computing, whatever else. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly of all, because this is probably the hardest to do, we need a research system that incentivizes open science with appropriate metrics. And I will come to this in a second. This policy is reflected in the recent ERA communication, as well as in all the policy documents and communications. It is reflected in the provisions for open science under Horizon Europe. There is, of course, EOSC that it is very relevant to what we're discussing today. As you know, the Commission has several roles. One is a policymaker, and what I just talked about is our role as policymaker. At the same time, it is a funder of projects, of research, and therefore it can apply its policies in its own programs. It's not the case in all funders. Many funders are just taking instructions from somewhere else about the policies. We're both a policy and the funder, therefore we can walk the talk, let's say. And we are a capacity builder, also have many programs for building capacities, like the regional development programs, or like the so-called structural funds, of which received a huge boost recently with the following the package to the RRF to respond to the economic hardship after the pandemic or during the pandemic. Next one, please. Next slide. So in the ERA communication that I mentioned earlier, this was published on the 30th of September. There are several actions related to open science. One is what I referred to incentivize open science by improving the research assessment system, reforming the research assessment system. We have another action about the launching, which has been launched now in end of March, a new platform for peer-reviewed open access publications, which is for the time being open to all Horizon 2020 and all Horizon Europe beneficiaries. This provides an additional free of charge option for open access publishing. And its main use is that, for us, its main policy attraction is that it puts in practice all our policies about open access publishing. So everybody who is funded by us can publish in this platform. Again, it is now 2 months since it has been launched roughly, and it holds already 60 or 70 papers that have already been peer-reviewed and deposited there. A third action is to analyze authors' rights. So copyright is an important part of the of what we do. And I didn't mention in the previous slide, but also the legal environment for data is an important dimension, enabling dimension of what we want to do in Europe, and the influence is a lot open science. So we have an action about copyright basically in Europe, which is influenced by a number of directives, and whose application in transposition into national legislation is supposed to have finished just 4 days ago on the 7th of June. And we need now to see how this has been transposed into national legislation, to what extent this facilitates or creates new types of obstacles to cross-country data sharing. And then we have a final action. Again, this is will be the subject of today's talks about the European Open Science Cloud. We have also several actions about citizen engagement. Next slide, please. Next one. Yes. So this is just to explain about the direction to which we want to reform the science assessment system. So we want to go from a system that today rewards largely individual competing scientists, where what counts mostly is where you publish in some iconic high GIF journals, rather than what you publish and what impact does it have, from a system that does not really reward collaboration and teamwork, to a system that rewards collaboration and sharing, that rewards those who share their data as early as possible. We want to go towards more composite definitions of excellence. We don't like the fact that 2 publication appropriate journals are enough to make a good career, to find a very good position. And we want to do this in a way that supports our open science policies and avoids lock-in over publicly funded research and research results in specific infrastructures that are not reduce the autonomy of the research performing organizations or of research in Europe overall. Next one. I said that we, as a funder, we also apply the policy in Horizon Europe. And the big difference of Horizon Europe now with respect to Horizon 2020 is that open science is mainstreamed throughout the program. So you will see open science in drafting the proposal, you'll see it in evaluating the proposal, you will see it in the grant agreement, you will see it in the guidelines for the project operation, you will see it in reporting. And of course, you see it in the work programs themselves, where there are several actions or many actions throughout the work program, not only in the EOS part or some policy support actions, but throughout the program that relate to open science. And all of this, of course, is aimed to promote the adoption of open science practices, providing open access to outputs, and so on and so forth. We're not the only funder that does this. There is progress all over Europe about that, but it's very heterogeneous. There are many other funders that do similar things, but we are not in a situation where we can say everybody is at the same level of development. Next one, please. Some of the important differences with respect to the past is that now publications need to be immediately open without embargoes, that all publications, even those published in open access journals, need to also be deposited in a trusted repository. Authors need to retain intellectual property. They cannot give it away to publishers entirely. They need to retain sufficient copyright so that they can open up and remain masters of how their paper is being disseminated. We stop refunding article processing charges for journals that are not entirely open access. And then we have we promote a lot data management plans as a living document. It will be an obligation for all projects. we will evaluate data management, some basic aspects of it already at the proposal stage, which was not the case before. Everybody will need to use only trusted repositories, and we define what trusted repository means. And all this, we have also a strong encouragement for this, not only for data sets, but as I said also at the beginning, for other types of outputs, including software, but also physical access in some cases to outputs that cannot be digitized. Next one, please. Okay, this is about EOSC. I mean, you will hear about this later on. This is EOSC in the Research Infrastructures Work Program. As you know, we do EOSC through a public, through a co-programmed partnership. I think you will hear about this this later. Next one, please. I think I have 5 minutes more. This is the way EOSC is structured as a partnership. So here on the left-hand side, you see the parties in the partnership. It's a so-called tripartite partnership. On one hand, we have the EOSC Association that brings together all the research and stakeholders, both services, data producers, universities, infrastructures, e-infrastructure, service providers, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the European Commission and the member states. The European Commission and member states have organized themselves in a steering board. It's called the EOSC Steering Board. And the European Commission signs, and this will take place on very soon, on the 15th or 16th of June, I believe. Will sign a partnership, a memorandum of understanding with the EOSC Association, committing the two parties on going forward together, and using the SRIA, the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda, as the basis for the future developments, and the Commission on its side pledges €500 million for development of the EOSC infrastructure over the next 7 years. This happens to the basis of SRIA, as I said. That is what you see there in the middle. And it's very important also to understand that the partnership includes several implementation levels, and with different implementation levels with their own metrics. And so it includes the European level, but then at national level, so countries commit at national level to do things that are synergetic to developing the EOSC infrastructure all over Europe, and at institutional level. Of course, you cannot do at European level everything. In fact, you do a very small part, maybe, I don't know, 10% of what you need to do to bring such an infrastructure to fruition over the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years. Next one. Okay, and EOSC is part of the European data strategy, for which our colleagues in DG Connect is leading. Are leading. I forgot to say, of course, but everybody knows. I think that the EOSC is co-led by ourselves in DG RTD and DG Connect. Next one. I'm going quickly because I see that time is flying. Let me say 2 words about risk infrastructures in the EOSC ecosystem. So we're very glad to see the ESFRI white paper of last year, Making Science Happen, and where research infrastructures, they say they have the ambition to be the major promoters of open science that provide fair and quality certified open data. This is very important because risk infrastructures are major, very major data producers. I have never seen numbers about this, and I would be very interested in seeing sometimes some numbers, but undeniably some of them in particular are huge data producers. That they will continue to support the development of EOSC, says in the white paper, for increased fair and open data sharing, and facilitate the cross-disciplinary research and the exploitation of data interoperability. Again, this is very important for individual ESFRI infrastructures that make this pledge, but also very important it gives a very important role to the ESFRI science clusters, because when it says they will facilitate the cross-disciplinary research and exploitation of data interoperability, this is where clusters such as those you have come naturally into place, and that their availability to stimulate interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research to achieve the societal goals. To the extent that these goals are pursued through interdisciplinary research or transdisciplinary research, and then the question arises, will the achievements be sustainable and beyond the lifetime of the particular projects, of any particular project, since these achievements require the contributions of different legal entities for different infrastructures to be sustainable. And I would like very much to hear from the presentations afterwards from the clusters on about this issue of sustainability of their results. And it also says finally that EOS should take full advantage of ESFRI best practice and services, which we fully agree, data management, storage, curation, everything else. And then of course the challenge comes, how about the interoperability of data and services, which we have learned also from COVID-19 and from many other areas that it's a major challenge that we are not very close at solving. So again, what the progress made in the clusters about data interoperability, for instance, will be very important. So I will look forward to hear about this as well in your presentations coming up. Next slide, which is the last one. So in here you see a more schematic depiction of research infrastructures in the EOSC ecosystem. The research infrastructures are major contributors of data and services, and are also major users of data and services that are provided by other providers or through EOSC or both. And there in the EOSC architecture, you have EOS Core with a generic services common to all. This raises the issue of authentication authorization infrastructure. And I remember that some of your ESFRI infrastructures or some of the clusters maybe have their own authentication authorization. So I already asked this question to you for your presentations. Given that EOS will have a common authentication authorization infrastructure, how do you intend this interaction to take place between thematic or domain-specific AAIs and EOSC level? And then in the EOSC exchange, which where the services come in, then you'll have generic services and domain-specific services. When it comes to domain-specific services that are, again, it is your concern, I will have some of the issues that I alluded to earlier, like with the increase in the disciplinary research, the more and more will fall across ESFRI infrastructures with more and more cross-domain use. So which begs the question, what happens with access? Will be open to all? Do you commit to open access for everybody? Who picks up the cost? If one infrastructure services are used by many others outside the infrastructure, and another one, it's the opposite, it's less so. Who bears the cost? How is the system scalable? Same thing with federated environments like EOSC. If you enter yourself in a federated environment, this will increase, which is a very good thing, of course. This will increase access to your services and the use of your services, which again begs the questions of what happens with cost, what happens with scalability. And maybe the maintenance of the domain-specific services that are, at the end of the day, I guess, will be owned by one ESFRI infrastructure because the clusters themselves do not have legal personality, would this be an in-kind contribution to EOSC? So that were my questions to finish my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kostas, and apologies for the confusion that I've created for you all in terms of the sliders. So if we move on to the slide where we see all the for Ari, but before we do that, we do have a few considerations. I'm going to pick up one question for you, Kostas, to take. Someone in the chat has written rewards and incentives. So this isn't a question, but a comment, if you like, on the level of EC is strongly supported by us that promote open science. However, I see a challenge in accepting this recommendations on the level of member states. So that's a comment. I think I'd like to pick up one of the questions from Raymond in the Q&A though, who said the data infrastructure and even an open data object is not enough, in my opinion, for EOS to be successful. We need a data science ecosystem, which, for example, also includes computing for data handling, analysis on enrichment. How will this be achieved, and what is the vision for this beyond EOS 0307? Kostas, do you want to say a couple of words?
On the first question, that's a very good question. So the reform of the research assessment system is supported by member states. We had the conclusions of the council on at the beginning of December, following the Commission communication in September, which very clearly, which was unanimous and very clearly they're supported. The reform of the research system is supported. This was discussed extensively in the research working party, so-called, in other words, at the level of the council between all members of the EU. They are supported. The question is that from being supported, generally speaking, and then putting them into daily practice, there is some distance. We think that we'll continue, of course, to work with member states. We have, some of you may know, these national points of reference for open science, with which we try to communicate and coordinate with member states. We have several ways to do that. There is ERAC, there's a whole governance in Europe around this, and this is, I think it's quite good. I mean, it is well, we don't have a major resistance. The key players in this are the research performing organization, institutions, and the funders. And that's why we think, I mean, the Commission acts as a facilitator in this, at least for the time being. We don't want to impose anything. We have most of Europe that agree on the DORA principles or similar, like the Leiden Manifesto, which is the principles for research assessment in open science. But we want to make this to have teeth. We want to make this really to take hold and accelerate progress, because there is progress, but very slow. And we think at this moment that the best way probably to go forward like this would be in a memorandum of understanding, a coalition of the willing, with a memorandum of understanding between two parties. On the one hand, the funders, and the other hand, the research institutions of all sorts. That the research institutions pledge to evaluate their staff and to have their internal policy in a certain way. And on the other hand, the funders pledging that if the research institutions do this, they will take this into account in funding research. Okay. And this way it will be far more powerful. It's a big discussion, which is the key topic, policy topic for us this year, 2021. I would say the number one topic 2020 was EOSC, to bring it to life. 2021 is risk assessment, the major topic. So we have lots of discussions, and if any of you or any of your communities are interested, we will be very glad to organize a separate meeting.
Super, thank you, Kostas. Now I'm going to move on. Now I do invite the experts to look at the answers, questions and answers in the chat, and please address them in real time if you can, if you're comfortable in answering that. And with that, I'm going to pass the floor to Adi Azmi, who's the coordinator of ENVI FAIR, and it stands for the Environmental Research Infrastructure Science Cluster project. You've been working in the RI development for the last decade and on various other initiatives, particularly in the framework of RDA and also with EOS. So the floor over to you. Thank you, Adi.
Thank you very much, Silvana, and thank you, Kostas. I'm trying to answer some of the questions that you raised, but I especially like the last one about the research assessment, because I work in University of Helsinki and I try to do similar changes inside there as well. It can be challenging. But let's go to the subject here, which is about the ENVI infrastructure cluster and the community behind. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you're not familiar, about what are the kind of typical characteristics of the environmental research infrastructures. First of all, the whole field, there is a huge wide range of disciplines studying the Earth system. And that also leads to multiple infrastructures. We're trying to observe and understand a system from different perspectives. And this is absolutely necessary to understand it. It's impossible basically to do it just one way. We also have a huge number of unique observations. So you need to store a lot of things which you don't know the value until later. The infrastructures are highly specialized. And this is very important to understand that because they are expensive and highly specialized, the infrastructures have to concentrate on their own users. And I'm 100% for the societal impact, and I will talk about it a lot here, but it is difficult for the individual infrastructures because they are paid to really to work on the specific issues. And as I mentioned, at the same time, these societal challenges are really important for, especially for environmental field, I think. And to answer this, and it's very well understood by everybody, is that you have to combine a lot of different kind of, not only data streams, but other services as well to be able to answer them. And so there is a little bit of conflict here. And that's what the cluster is intending to solve here, is using collaboration, trying to make possible to answer societal challenges. So the cluster itself, just as a background also, the little blue circle there is the one which is the current ESFRI project, which I'm co-coordinator of. But there's a lot of other infrastructures also in the environmental field, which has been in the previous projects, but also are part of our community, at least in the strategic level. And some of them actually are even part of EOSC Life, which will be presented later, but we see that they are part of the environmental infrastructure community. Another thing which is important to understand here is that there's also a lot of other infrastructures which are bubbling on the either national level or then regional level, or which are coming up to the ESFRI level, let's say. And so there is a lot of different ways which are, and this changing landscape also makes it challenging to follow everything. Just very briefly, we have had 3 cluster projects. This is the third one. This is actually much narrower in scope. Some things what was mentioned before, like citizen science and so on, they were actually handled more in a previous ENVI project for our point of view. And we could, of course, expand this one. But currently, the ENVI fair is really concentrated on this open science because it was the priority at the time. So how do we see ENVI in the landscape of research? Is that we are a combination of these ESFRI cluster, ESFRI RIs, but we have a different relationship to them. We have a role to play there. We also play directly a role to science communities, and of course towards open science and EOSC, and then to the society as well, at least in some sense. And I'll try to explain it in the future slides here. So let's use a kind of interesting metaphor here. We have on the, basically you always end up in the situation where you have on the other side, you have research infrastructures producing services for others. And then you have different kind of user communities on the other side. And there's always a barrier between them. And the barrier can be higher or lower. Here it's everywhere the same, but it represents the difficulties of users in general to get the successful use of research infrastructure products. The traditional model for infrastructure users is that you create these kind of narrow things here shown with the narrow Lego blocks, is that, and this is the role of infrastructures really, this is what they are being funded for, is that they provide very specialized service from the supply side here on the left side, and on the demand side also the users usually present, the scientist or whatever creates their own approach, and they don't usually necessarily even share this one to anybody. So you end up with very narrow things on both sides and sometimes very ad hoc solutions as well. But this is working, and this is something what you need to do anyhow for a lot of infrastructure. You need these specialized services, but it would be nicer to be able to do wider. And this is now when we go what the ENVI fair and some of the previous projects as well has achieved and will achieve. First of all, if you think in relation to EOSC and open science, we do internal domain harmonization. I think this is a very important part that we discuss inside the domain itself, inside the infrastructures involved and others as well. What would be the best solution? Here, the guy with the cape is the refer, and the others are the infrastructures. There's many of them. We also then bring this information, what kind of needs and specialities, what kind of blocks we need to the EOSC and open science community in general, and thereby interacting there and participating in some sense in specialities which we are very good at on the development of these kind of generic wider blocks, which would cover more fields of science. But it's a discussion. I think that one of the key points, especially for success of EOSC, is that what the infrastructures in our field do is that they have huge number of users already. And everything what we do, which is either policies or standards or even the background infrastructure, which is using EOSC services, really kind of highlights the benefit of using them. And I think this is a relatively kind of short-term thing, but it really can drive home for other people as well, what you can do with these kind of services. And then a little bit more complex picture here. This is a bit my own opinion here, is that a lot of these services like AI, which was mentioned by Kostas and so on, they are the kind of things, I don't know if you play with Legos as a child, but you have these base plates. And I think that they are more like base plates, or relatively narrow, but very wide pieces. And in many cases, they are not enough to get past the barrier. You need to build specific tools, wider or narrower, depending on the use on the other side, on both sides, actually. You need to build one on the producing side, but also from the user side. And sometimes the users have to create their own little blocks. And key point is that you should be able to share both of these blocks and be somewhat interoperable. They don't always have to be. Legos are a little bit too interoperable for this metaphor to be perfect. One example what we are doing is ESFRI Rehab, which is basically a way of machine actionable interface with a lot of knowledge things and so on. I will not go into detail here, but what I think is important, what it shows is that it uses the science demonstrators to not only to show the supply side blocks, what you need to build this kind of thing to work and to make them to work together, which is nice itself, but especially this kind of notebooks and demonstrator, machine actionable demonstrators, it also provides for the user side explanation, how you can use these things, and they can share these blocks also in this kind of platform. And so you really get the user side as well as wide as possible, or at least shared the pieces, what you need for each user group to use their own services, VREs and whatever you want to build on top of that. So this is just another picture of the ESFRI Hub, but it also shows that we have knowledge bases and training platforms and so on. But let's move on with a matter of time. The other thing what is important here is that we also provide, of course, for the ESFRI infrastructures, which are part of it. This is important, but we are not just providing for something. It's a between piece. For the inside, the domain harmonization is already its value itself for the infrastructures. These blocks, what we create is and interoperable blocks are really important for a lot of infrastructures because they, as I mentioned before, they are mostly mandated for serving their own discipline. And having this kind of ready-made blocks is really useful for them. It saves a lot of time and effort, and it makes them more important. We also provide, of course, training and documentation. And especially for new infrastructures, you can think them as like a parts kit that you buy a ready-made box for service provision. Not maybe that far, but at least the instructions, what kind of blocks do you need? And of course, hopefully in the future, also new user groups from all these multidisciplinary services. As an example of this kind of multidisciplinary thing, we are building this dashboard of state of environment for the EOS future, together actually with a SHOC cluster, which is presented in a moment. And it will provide this kind of public and policymakers a real-time environmental indicators. And I think that's a very good demonstrator of what you can do with this. And it also creates these blocks what we need for both ends. Another thing which I think is important, especially for environmental sector sustainability, is that if you build this kind of system where scientists can try different workflows and publish these kind of workflows between them, they can be created as a standardized things which can really benefit society and could be implemented in the Copernicus system. Right now, a lot of our services are actually in Copernicus system, not as many as could be, but the point is that this way we could also enhance in that sense in there as well the potential for multidisciplinary answers. And this also provides sustainability, of course, for these services. If you look now briefly to the future, we basically have two ways of approaching. We can think that this kind of cluster activity in the environmental sector is not so important and end it. Of course, the existing services and blocks exist. That's very good. The standardization, the internal policies and how shared, that's all working. The hub platform sustainability is undecided at the moment. It's a demonstrator. But what I see the biggest danger there is divergence, because as I said, that when you have a new service and new users and so new infrastructure, you really need to somehow make it possible for them constantly to work for the multidisciplinary angle, even though their main goal from the member states and from the general assemblies is to provide for certain user groups. And I will talk about the resilience in a moment. For the if we want instead to work for more like reinforcement or building new things on top of these clusters.
2 minutes, Harry.
Yes, this is my second last slide, so it's okay. So then we can really extend to national level infrastructures and also researchers. And I have a lot of responses for this one from the, let's say, national level, which would be really interested about using this kind of infrastructures will be built for the environmental sector. We can provide support for the Horizon Europe projects and missions related to environment. New infrastructure services and new infras can use directly these things. And this builds this convergence, which creates a higher potential for societal and especially economic interfaces and smaller companies building their own little blocks on the user side. And for the societal resilience, I just want to show this. If you're old enough to remember 2010 volcanic eruption, at that time, we already had some infrastructures who could actually provide important scientific information for this, but there was no framework for collaboration and the response time was not excellent. And also there was a lot of time wasted on trying to find the correct place and thinking about what kind of data you have to use and whatever. And right now we have a solution for this volcanic ash thing and also other kind of smoke. But what happens with the next societal challenge? And in environment, I think that this is going to happen more and more. And for this resilience, we need a framework behind which helps the infrastructures to work together and to produce things and change things rapidly in a case of such activity. And so I will just leave this slide here. I basically presented it all in other forms, but I'm happy to hear if you have any questions here, and I can go back there.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Ari. Important reflections on there, especially the one you indicate about existing RI adopted services, which will continue to run after. That's something that clearly is related to the sustainability part that is absolutely crucial, as we know. A quick question. I've seen that the experts are responding directly in the chat, and I have a raised hand with Kostas. So Kostas, over to you. I do have your mute, Kostas. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Ari. Very nice presentation. The ENVI hub. So this could this be completely generic as a platform, and will you try to bring it into the EOS Future project, which precisely works on developing a generic platform?
Especially parts of it, as of course it's a very generic in a sense as a platform, and it's basically the idea is just that you have a machine readable interface with basically you can do metadata searches, and then you have the notebook environment and some computing associated with it. Of course, to make it really transversal to everything, you would really need a much stronger, I mean, it's a demonstrator, but you would need a lot of infrastructure built behind it. For the EOS Future, yes, for these use cases, what we are doing, a lot of these blocks are directly relevant used in that one as well. We try to see the synergies when we propose these use cases for EOS Future. So I'm hoping that we will use this as much as we can on this approach as well.
And a second question, if I may, this is a generic question for everybody. Would you say that 100% of data produced by the ESFRI infrastructures in ENVI are now fair?
No. They are also.
And if not, what's the plan to make them fair?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think that this challenge comes from not maybe necessarily so much from the infrastructures per se, but from the member states, and then also the research performing organizations inside the member states producing for these infrastructure, because they are so widely distributed. You need to consider this aspect as well. But I think that the majority of especially larger infrastructure data is completely fair at the moment.
Thank you, Kostas. Quick question also from Andreas Petzold, who's the ESFRI project coordinator. So that's good. Over to you quickly, Andreas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's not a question to Kostas, it's to add on a bit to Ari and to answer Kostas' question. So one key effort of ESFRI is to develop fairness assessment tools, which we can then apply to improve fairness in the course of the project. And these tools are actually developed together with the GoFair Foundation to make it available to all science clusters and to all initiatives. So to broaden our knowledge here so that we get the fair implementation profiles in place to make sure that we can reach as high up into the fairness pyramid as possible at the end of the cluster projects, and to know the gap afterwards to fill them, and to provide these assessment tools to everybody who is interested in to apply them. That's our concept.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for that add-on. Well, I'm going to pass the floor now to our next speaker, Nicholas Blomberg, who's the EOS Life project coordinator. So whilst Nicholas uploads his presentation directly, I will read out one of the comments that's coming through in the chat from Bob Jones, who likes the Lego analogy for EOS and EOS Core being the flat bed plate. So I've just lost that. Where did that go? However, when EOS is sometimes equated with a glue that federates, we have to avoid the craggle and keep room for agility and innovation. So that's a consideration. And with that, let me finish that. Nicholas Blomberg, thank you, Bob. We'll look at that and see if we can get some comment in the other Q&A ongoing, okay? Nicholas coordinates the EOS Life project to build an open collaborative digital space for European life science research to drive interoperability between 13 life science research infrastructures. He's also joined with Michael Reis, as Andreas also joined Ari for ENVI Fair, and I'm going to pass you the floor. Thank you very much, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Silvana and Giovanni, and for all.
Nicholas, we have lost you.
We've lost Nicholas. Nicholas, can you hear us? Nicholas. Okay, whilst we get Nicholas back, probably having a bandwidth problem. Nicholas, are you there? Okay, let's wait for Nicholas to come back in. What I'll do is then exploit Andreas. I'd like you to quickly touch upon this question. Back to ENVI Fair. How does ENVI Fair plan to address the most pressing environmental challenges? So a few words on that if you can, whilst we wait for Nicholas to come back to us.
Yeah, so one tool we develop is this, what Ari has mentioned, the dashboard on the state of the environment. This is one tool to provide information, real-time information on the state of the environment to help decision makers on to keep them well informed. That is one thing of how we want to, let's say, to support, how we call it, educated decisions. That is one thing what we can do. And the other point is that we have dedicated quite a few efforts on, for instance, selecting, and that's also happening in EOSC Future, selecting the very important field of the change of biodiversity in the changing climate, and to investigate the system here. And this is part of our EOSC Future project. So the climate crisis is so big, but we try to build information blocks for the science and policy in general, and we try to build up interdisciplinary research platforms to tackle few questions like essential ocean variables monitoring, essential climate variables monitoring, and all this kind of stuff, which connects us to the international research communities. This is a bit of our concept.
And
it
also, exactly, I was just going to pick that up, the mission-based shops that are taking form as we speak. I'm going to pass now the floor to Nicholas. We do have you back. Nicholas, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm sorry for that. There seems to be a transient internet outage here.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where exactly I left you, but I wanted to say that we think about the European Open Science Cloud as three major components. One is really the consolidation of the e-infrastructure. And I said Kostas talked about the AAI, and I'll talk a little bit about how we integrate the work or the services in the life sciences into that overall consolidated European e-infrastructure. Kostas talked a lot about open science. We see that as the second component of the European Open Science Cloud. And of course, a large part of EOSC Life is about preparing the infrastructures in the life sciences to be part of that open science transition and that open science landscape. And then, of course, we are a scientific community. We bring in a large user group base from the scientific communities. And of course, we want to make sure that these users can participate and work within the European Open Science Cloud and really be an integral part. And in that sense, I actually think the research infrastructures should be and must be seen as an integral part of the whole EOSC community and not as an add-on. It's easy to focus on the sort of e-infrastructure aspect, but a lot of the technology is commoditizing. And I think what is truly unique is that connection to the scientific practices, the European funding models, and the way that we operate, do science, but also run projects in Europe. So with that, I just wanted to say a few words on life science. And I think in many ways, we are quite similar to the environmental sciences and Ari's picture. The data is rich and diverse. It maps on to a large number, or maybe all the major challenges and missions that we're facing now as societies. We have marine outstations that work closely with environmental data and of course the marine biology. We have plant phenotyping centers that are looking both at satellite images and direct biomolecular measurements in the field. And then of course we have all the sort of traditional cell biology up until clinical trials. So it's a very wide variety of data types that we are working with. And so what we are trying to do is to provide a solution that help the life scientists to make use of that data and the tools that analyze and prepare that data in the cloud. And as such, we see it almost like a democratization exercise. Users and researchers should be able to work with data from these advanced facilities of the life science research infrastructures, regardless of where they are in Europe. You don't need to be at a major research center with massive capabilities. You should be able to do good science also at sort of any university or any research institute across Europe. In the middle of this picture, we have a little virus, and of course, the EOSC Life cluster has been quite busy in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'll say a few words about that. But just to start, we are 13 infrastructures on the life science part of the ESFRI roadmap. And what we set out to do in EOSC Life is really to try to create the life science component of EOSC. And we talked about data. And so we wanted to establish the sort of the life science EOSC by making sure that we publish our catalogs and resources into the European Open Science Cloud. And with that, we need to have policies and guidelines and processes. A lot of the data that we are managing comes from human volunteers. And of course, we need to preserve the trust, both of the volunteers and the general citizens. And so the secure data is important for us. But data isn't enough. We want to also make sure that we populate an ecosystem of tools and analysis practices in EOSC, and I'll come back to that in a few slides. And if we've done that, we also want to demonstrate the usefulness by connecting life scientists to EOSC, and we've had open calls for partnership and participation. We are just about to start the first tranche of projects, and I have to say we we used the word catastrophically successful. We had probably 10 times more applications than we ever expected, and so the funding rate was below 10%. So that was, in a way, disappointing to turn away so many good projects, but it was incredibly rewarding to see the interest from the community. And actually what we did as a response was to go through a maturation phase with each and every applicant to help them to write good applications for these type of projects. And so we could, even if we couldn't accept the project, we could give a benefit to a very large part of the interested community. So a brief overview of the project, but it is about people. It's about building skills and capabilities, both within the research infrastructures and within our user communities. And so, of course, consolidation of the processes to get a clear sort of picture of how we can work across infrastructures and different capabilities in the life sciences. And of course, the training materials are a big part of what we are doing. And through this whole, we also, and you will see that access, user access, and the provenance of data, so the reproducibility is really something that we've focused on. And Michel can answer questions to that. He's been leading a lot of the work on our quality assurance across the infrastructures. So this is just a quick, very nice infographic that we got some help from the EOSC Secretariat to produce on some of the recent outcomes. We talked about the life science AAI, Kostas, and I think we've had a long-term strategy within the life sciences to incorporate that with the services from the e-infrastructure, so the Shiant services. And actually what these projects have allowed us to do is to have the funding where we can actually start to move that from ideas to operational services. And I think that's incredibly rewarding. The other thing I'd like to just point out in this quite rich is RO Crate, which is, to our knowledge, actually the first implementation of a fair digital object and a way of packaging both data and the workflows and the analysis practices around that data in a open, transparent, and sort of reproducible packet of fair digital object that then can be referenced and reused in the literature. So I talked about COVID, and I'll give a few very quick examples. So we were early on trying to support, and one of the things we managed to do is to get all of our national compute centers to give away free resources to a COVID-19 biohackathon. And so I think that shows what is possible on a transnational scale, but what we now need to fix is, of course, to organize the cost recovery models, because giving away storage and compute isn't very sustainable. There needs to be a link to the underlying grant funding. And that, I think, is a big challenge. We sped up some work in the project. So the Workflow Hub, which is the provenance systems for open workflows and the RO Crate objects, was delivered a year early. So that was a fairly heroic assessment or achievement by the team. And the reason for that is that we could use it then for all the open COVID-19 workflows in our community. And we are building a repository to host the data that is now coming out of the COVID-19 clinical trials. And so to Costa's question, is 100% of the data fair? I would say not yet, but we are trying to do something about it. And so this will be participant level data from clinical trials. And of course, we have been working hard to extend the COVID-19 data portal in close collaboration with the EC. So this is just one example very quickly, but I think for me, so this is about how we can harvest the viral sequences that are coming out of the genome surveillance projects for SARS-CoV-2. So that's the virus that causes COVID-19, and how we can drive that into open systems by providing open reproducible tools and good training. And we've done that within the context of a global effort in the Galaxy project. And actually yesterday, the paper on this was published in Bioinformatics. So I'm happy to put the pointer to that in the chat. And I think that fits into a much larger and very complex ecosystem. But I think the take-home message from this slide, which is really about how we try to populate and connect the data to interesting analysis tools, is that we need to work both with the developers, so the scientists who are developing interesting analytical methods, say artificial intelligence systems. We need to work with the users who will be using these tools, but we also need to work with the infrastructure providers, so the sys administrators that need to deploy these across different systems. And you have to take all of these different groups into account to build an effective ecosystem. And as part of this, the traceability, the provenance, the sort of reproducibility of science has been really a leading light for us. And that's where the FAIR digital objects, the RO crate developments have put in. So I think that's a really interesting contribution and shows the practice. The other part of this is, of course, that it's quite compute intensive. And so we've managed to get a lot of computing centers tied into life science centers interested and agree to support a distributed network. And so this is, I think, a cloud in practice. We can submit a job anywhere in Europe and it's fanned out to 9 or 10 different centers. And actually what is interesting about this is that we are now looking at data locality, and so that the compute can be performed at the center closest to the large data sets, and so that we minimize data transfers. And I talked about EOS Glyph, our toolbox for sensitive data sharing. There's been quite a lot of work on documented requirements, understanding the current landscape, and we are now compiling all of that into a sort of a toolbox. All of that material is open access. It's available on Zenodo. I put the DOIs on the slide, but I think it emphasizes the leading sort of practice within our cluster is open science. And actually a real benefit of open science is the ease of collaborating, because you don't need to negotiate any IPR between different organizations. And I know that has hampered some EOS projects in the past. So with that, I'm wrapping up a little bit. So I think we're about halfway through our project. We have 2 more years to go. I think we like to think that we have actually now established the life science component in EOSC. We have published quite a lot of data resources. Our catalog is about 110 resources currently, and there is another cohort of resources that are being made cloud ready. We have a first view on the policies and guidelines we think we are working. This is, and I think will always be, work in progress. I think we are in the midst of populating an ecosystem of tools for the users. And of course, COVID-19 has showed that this works in practice with quite large data volumes and large user communities. And as I said, I think we are enabling data-driven research for life sciences. The open calls were very, very popular, and we are looking forward to run these projects now. And so with that, I just wrap up with some questions or comments or discussion points. The first is I think we are at an inflection point in EOSC where we are moving from these sort of principles and discussion on organizations to a much more practical focus on operation. And the research infrastructures and the clusters are really critical there because they sit on a large body of production services with user communities that we can just bring in and make part of the EOSC. I think we need to, as a consequence of that, we really need to shift the focus to practicality, to look at implementation, evidence of usability and evidence of use. And it's easy to get stuck on the sort of sunlit uplands of theoretical perfection, but reality will be quite scruffy. We're at the leading edge of science, and we will always have to deal with imperfect solutions. But as long as they produce interesting data for our scientists, I think that's perfectly fine. We need to think about the roles of different EOSC actors. It's very tempting to think about everything should reach the end user scientist. I don't think that's true. I think the vast majority of EOSC services are actually what we could call business-to-business services. They are a harmonized platform that enable other organizations to serve their users better and at the lower cost points. And so we need to think what are the real entry points for users. And we think that workflows are really the first-class citizens here. That's how the vast majority of our scientists access EOSC. But that means that a lot of other services just need to be invisible because they underpin the workflows. We have large communities, and one of the benefits of the clusters is actually the operational processes, where we link the data services in EOSC to the facilities and the practical user access when we help the users come to a microscope or do an interesting experiment on a model organism, or visit say a marine outstation. And the data from those visits needs to be taken home and processed, and that's where I think EOSC has a real role to play. And the last point is that we have quite a lot of really established solution for our domain-specific needs. We talked about ethics compliance, but we also have access benefit sharing, so the Nagoya protocol and all of these sort of things. And that's where I think the ESFRI research infrastructures will have an important role in the future EOSC landscape. So thank you very much. And sorry for dropping out mid-flight earlier on.
Don't worry, Nicholas. Thank you very much for that presentation. And workflows is incredible that you said that, because both Rocreate and Common Workflow Language are communities we've known for many, many years and key to the whole ecosystem as well. And we know that there's a bunch of Australians working on Rocreate within the CS3 project, for example, that are struggling to continue their efforts working with the Europeans because they don't have resources at the moment. So excellent for bringing that up, and the whole fair digital objects, which has been also a recurring theme in recent discussions with other communities too. With that, I'd like to pass the floor to Elena Kwok, or Elena, if you'd like to start putting your slide deck up to share. Elena is the ESCAPE General Assembly Chair, and she has a long experience as a data analyst and works for Virgo Experiment since 1995. She led the noise analysis group for Virgo from 2008 to 2014. She's the inspiration author behind Wavefire, gravitational waves. Some of you might be familiar with that. And with this, then I'll pass you the floor, Elena. Thank you very much.
Hi, Silvana. Thank you for this presentation. I try to be in time. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Thank you. So I am going to present ESCAPE. I'm also the chair of the General Assembly for ESCAPE, and I wanted to say what we are doing, what is our plan, how we can contribute to this environment. ESCAPE is essentially the European Science Cluster for Astronomy and Astroparticle Physics. What we do is to bring together astroparticle physics and nuclear physics community, and this is an important point in our environment. The the main goals for ESCAPE are to build and improve an innovation path that could have also impact on a large society. We build a cross-border European multidisciplinary environment that is useful for science, but that has to be inside the EOSC environment. And in this idea, we adopt the common approach for data management. We try to stay with the FAIR principle, as you already listened from the other cluster. We insist and work a lot on the interdisciplinary aspect of this research environment, and we invest time in educated new scientists, early career investigator that works in our environment. We are a community, as I said, of astrophysics and particle physics. Here you see a list of the main ESFRI partner of the ESCAPE, but as in this slide, we are 31 partners that include not only the main ESFRI in our environment, but also Pan-European International Organization and also other research infrastructure, and comprise as in also to external companies that work with us and bring innovation in our path. How we are organized, ESCAPE is essentially a consortium where we have the director of each ESFRI and research infrastructure that contribute to ESCAPE, but that also rely on the national stakeholders. And we are also collaborating and try to invite more and more to contribute to our work, also external communities that are APEC, Astronet, NUPEC, and ECFA, that are part of all our external advisor board. We already met this I don't know the name, this other consortia, and we try to take advantage of their suggestion. We build for ESCAPE an EOSC cell. Each of our, maybe I miss, no, sorry, because I don't find the slide, how we are organized, sorry for this. We organize our work in 5 different working package. Each of these has a goal to build what it is needed to create this EOSC cell for ESCAPE. So we started with creating a data lake where a place where we can easily find the data from the different research infrastructure and experiment. So an easy access to the data lake. We have a package that is working on the catalog of the software that help us with the best practices to build this software. We have a package that is dealing with the virtual observatory. We build also a data science platform with the main goal of this ESCAPE cell for a scientist will be to have an end-to-end path for our science. So from the data lake to the data analysis platform, and also with the working package 6 to involve external participation from citizen science. So it is important that we can show that we can work in an open science environment, trying to have advantage of what it is built from different communities, because we are astroparticle physics that have this own tool in their own research institute, but that in a global environment can be a big advantage for all of us. Why we insist on working with the science cluster? Because this is easy for us to build this community. It's easy to work in a interdisciplinary environment. We are building this block for the EOSC framework. We have also a cross-domain for research development. We are working, many of us is working on machine learning, artificial intelligence in the different research institute. And in this way, for us, it is easier to share what the science that we are doing. We, as a cluster, are trying also to incentivize the participation of the researcher in this environment. It is not easy for the astroparticle physics to have this clear path in the EOSC framework, but this is what we are trying to do, to involve more and more the research activity in the EOSC framework. And we did this also with the support with the other consortia. And what we did, and this started already in ESCAPE, is to build some use case. We call at the beginning test science project, but they are science project that can be developed in the EOSC environment. And these are the two test science projects that will be inserted in the EOSC future program. We concentrated on two main goals for this science project. One based more on astrophysical side, that is based on gravitational wave science, and the other on particle science, that concerns more the dark matter search. We want to bring there more and more researchers that try to adopt the EOSC framework, and that can show that we can build a research activity from the beginning to the end in this environment. And this brings together a lot of community that without the cluster maybe are not collaborating, but the presence of ESCAPE facilitated the interaction among these different environments, even if because ESCAPE in its nature is a natural multi-messenger framework. So there are a lot of different
we lost Elena? Okay, no. Go.
Oh, sorry, because I have
fine, you're back. You're back.
Thank you, because I have not a good internet connection today. We, as ESCAPE, worked also with external companies. As Silvana said at the beginning, we try to benefit of the presence of this digital company in our consortium, and we developed two and more, and we are working on more different projects with the innovative solution. These are Wayfire, Gamma Learn. We are talking of science on which we can publish paper, on which the standard researcher do science, but with the help also of external companies of innovative solution for the management of the data, for the publication of the results, and so on. And this can happen only thanks to the presence of different partners in our cluster. So what we can bring as a cluster for the future is what we are doing as a scientist, as a researcher in the EOSC can be also useful for the external society, because we are dealing with a lot of data, big data. We have to find innovative solutions to access to this data through the best search for archived data. We are dealing with the artificial intelligence, so new algorithm, new way to do data science that can be useful also for general society, working always with the good practice for data management and results publication. So the cluster, as I'm saying, is a good scheme to continue to work, because it tries to involve the researcher from their daily activity to a general vision. If as a researcher we are part of this EOSC environment, we can contribute more and more to the real domain platform where we can, all of us can profit of the best framework to work within. So we wanted to continue to work in Escape because for us it is easier to work with this mixed science communities that are not easy to work with in a general framework. We can act as a community towards the European consortia, and we can bring together the same vision, and this is important. So if we continue to work in this way, we can build this large community in astro and particle physics that want to work in a well defined environment for open science. So we wanted to continue to maintain Escape even after the ending of the project. We wanted to still be a consortium, a cluster, because this help us in doing better science. And this is the main motivation. It is not a political one, but with this community in which we can mix different expertise, computer scientists, digital company, particle physics, particle physics, we can do better science. And this is important because more and more we collaborate with external environment, more we can grow as a science. So we have a plan to sustain still Escape after the ending of the project, because we share the vision, because we want to do science in this environment. We want to adopt the fair data access. We want to adopt a common platform. We want to share our results in the open science. So the plan is to include more and more other research institutes, and also to enlarge our community to a global partnership. So this is my summary slide with the main working package that contributed to Escape. So the point is that we are organizing this way. As I insist on this because we have a common vision. We want to build this community because we want to create synergies. We want to create a future collaboration. It is not only in the framework of this project, but it is really a path that we want to continue to adopt even after the ending of Escape, because we have a benefit from this interaction. We can have access to different data, to the expertise of the different ESFRI to build a better science that we can share outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to go for a break, but I will pass the floor for just one question. And there's also Ian Bird and Giovanni Lamanna who can support the questions. You're all responding in the Q&A, which is wonderful. An open question then to you. By which mechanisms will the development of the tools and services made in Escape become part of the EOSC implementation? Who would like to address that?
Giovanni, do you want to answer, or will?
Yes, there is the first target that is to bring to maturity core services for the so-called Escape EOSC cell, that are the services for the exabyte scale data management, that are the services for having software catalog that are much more dynamic than a simple web repository, because we look forward to collect the user experience, the workflows, and to make them fundable. Now, the analysis platform is the way through we can interoperate data, interface with virtual observatory in astronomy, also with the advent of the next generation ESFRI research infrastructures, therefore with a huge volume of data. all these services at the end are triggering, as is usual, is used to be in our communities, a lot of innovation, a lot of developments. But at the end, the services are sufficiently generic to be part of core services of EOSC, and therefore transversally applicable to any other disciplines. Not all of them will be part of the core service. I think a few of them that are pillars of the uptake of open science in our domain should be in the EOSC core services, because we can count on in this way on a mutual agreement or mutual coordination between the Central EOSC Association and the national institutes to make sustainable the operation of such services.
Excellent. Very good, Giovanni. Now, with that, then, I think this is time for us to grab a coffee, okay? So I'd like to thank all the speakers so far and all the questions that are coming in. We will come back at 11:20. So indeed, grab a coffee and we'll see you in a very short time. Thanks once again. Okay, so we have 2 minutes, but let's start. If we can bring up Rudolf, we can stop sharing so we can pick, so Rudolf can share his slide deck. Thank you very much.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, Rudolf, we can see that.
Great, and the sound is okay?
The sound is perfect, yes.
Fantastic.
So welcome back, everybody. We hope you've grabbed your tea and coffee and you have it with you there as we're moving on to our next speaker, who is Rudolf Dibper, who represents Panosh Expand. Rudolf is the ESRS IT advisor of Panosh and the ESRS, part of the ESRS directorate. So with that, he represents the ESRS in the Elite IT group. The EOS Association is a member of the Panosh Executive Board. So with that, I'd like to pass the floor over to you. Thank you very much, Rudolf.
Thank you, Silvana. And thank you also, Giovanni, for organizing this workshop. I know how much work that is. So let me start presenting Panos and Expands on behalf of the two coordinators. For Panos, the coordinators and the goods. For Expands, Patrick Fuhrmann. the two projects pursue very similar goals, and I come to this. Now, who are we? We come from the photon and neutron analytical facilities in Europe. These facilities are used to look at matter, in all its appearances and try to understand how it works. And here on the slide, you see different possible applications, which range really from life sciences to cultural heritage. And it also immediately shows you that we can look at matter in all scales. Usually now, with the last generation of our accelerator-based machines, we can look at nanoscale objects, but nothing prevents us to look at skulls, which are large non-destructively and create humongous data sets. So that's what we are in. The projects, PANOS and EXPANSE, represent almost all of the research facilities of photon and neutrons in Europe. And you have here the two projects, how they spread over the facilities and in Europe. The fact sheets, just to highlight that we have PANOS as the ESFRI roadmap project to connect to the ESFRI research infrastructures to EOSC. Because ESFRI, obviously, as you know, target upcoming research infrastructures or upgrade programs, like in our case for the ESRF. But we have, for instance, the European Spallation Source, which is still under construction and will become operational in the years to come. Silvana, Maria-Lisa. So EXPANSE targets more the national photon and neutron facilities and groups almost all of them and complements the landscape with PANOS. And here you have an impression of what these research infrastructures look like. They are large, big science infrastructures producing humongous volumes of data. I would estimate, coming back to the question of Kostas, that we are probably producing something in the order of 20 to 40 petabytes annually right now. This will explode. We know that we are looking at a challenge here. Only for the ESRF, with a brand new accelerator put in place and operational since a couple of months. We know that our data production will ramp up by a factor of 10 in the next 10 years. And of course, there is a challenge of scale to make all that data fair and with that available to EOSC. But we are getting there. And coming back again to the question of Kostas, where are we with that? It's difficult to say, only because obviously, what does that mean, fair? There is no end point in fair. I think that we have gone a fantastic road to fairness, but it will never end. It will be a constant process. I would say that these facilities we are probably globally beyond 50% of fair data, and rapidly bringing in more and more data sets, making them fair as we go along. The aim is to build on top of the fair data the services. That's, of course, the aim of the whole story. Data as such is not enough. Services will make the difference. And this links to the questions I show here, which are fundamental for researchers who come to our facilities and to also the researchers who will come to EOSC. How do they find the data? How can they get access to the data? How to look at them? What is the meaning of the data, and can they trust the correctness of the data? And one of the underlying issues we have with the data avalanche in our facilities is how to ensure that all this data is not inundating the researchers, and how can we still make sure that the experiments producing all the data will lead as quickly as possible to a publication, and showing what the result is coming out of the data, because we clearly see that this becomes an issue. The more data our facilities produce, and knowing also that the data is more complex, this time to publication tends to get longer and longer, and we have to fight that. It's fundamental that we put in services, data management services, data analysis services, which can keep that under control. So the related question is then obviously, how can terabytes of data be shifted around in Europe? How can we search them, access them with workflows, reference to them, and then be rewarded for using the data, of course also referring to the original producers, and how to connect all to these services. So quite a bit of work on our table, but we are getting there. Now PANOSC and also EOSC should offer a number of services linked to this, and that is obviously the first one is remote access to the analytical facilities that became fundamentally important with COVID. We have been extremely reactive and successful in doing that. Amazing, actually, the progress we made on a very short time lapse to maintain the access to our facilities remotely. And linked to this, how the data can be made downloadable, how to access all the services which now have to be accessible remotely. And then, of course, we still have one big issue, which we still have a bit of time to tackle, but it's not to be forgotten, that our data policies have provision to keep the data for a certain amount of time, after which normally the data should disappear from the facilities. Some of it should be preserved beyond, and for the time being, there is no model in place which guarantees that. Work in progress, I would say. One of the extremely useful services we have developed in the frame of PANOSC Expanse is the Visa portal, which is a full-blown data analysis and access portal for the research facilities, providing access to the data, to analysis software, to the compute infrastructure, going so far as to be able to conduct remotely experiments, up to a certain complexity, obviously, because you can't do everything, but quite a bit of it was possible. And this is one of the key outcomes which will certainly also find its way into EOSC via EOSC Future. Now, PANOSC and Expanse ultimately will provide all these different things, underlying open data and open science. I will not go through all of them, but they are sort of in an order which goes from the basics, which is providing the open data, to the more sophisticated stuff like data simulation on top of the data, the scientific software catalogs, the e-training platforms, and so on. So this is well progressing. We are already seeing a lot of results mid-term through both of these projects. And we are quite proud of the achievements, but we also know that there is still a lot of work ahead of us before wrapping up the projects and then feeding all these outputs into a sustainability model, because of obviously what cannot happen or what should not happen is that all these achievements are then not sustained once the projects come to an end. Coming to that aspect of sustainability, we have these different services immediately in mind when it comes to sustainability. The AAI, for instance, the AAI is our umbrella in a community AAI. It's now operated by Géant and will also be sustained via, probably most likely via Géant. And we need to ensure between the research infrastructures that we find the money to have the sustainability for the AAI system, such that it can be also further developed and then fully integrated into EOSC. Integration of the AI via Géant into EOSC is a low-hanging fruit. It's already scheduled and will be done at the beginning of the EOSC Future project. But you have also the other services like the data transfer, the help desk operation, and then coming to simulation, down to simulation and e-learning, which have to be sustained. How do we intend to do that? We have two main organizations to do that. On one side, on the left-hand side, you have all the photon sources. On the right-hand side, you have the neutron sources. They are organized in leagues, which provide the discussion platform and the organizational structure to coordinate all this. And we are already starting the discussions of sustainability of the outcomes from the European projects into the facilities who ultimately have to find the resources, human resources, and the money to sustain those outputs. So just to show again what I've just said, that we are attacking that on the level of leaps and lengths. This will certainly require that we draw up an individual or grouped memorandums of understanding, which define the cost and the service levels we expect from each of the services for our communities, and then of course our communities and making them available also to EOSC. Coming to the added value of the clusters, I must say that the last years we came together with the cluster coordinators in a very collaborative and friendly manner. I think we enjoy finding ourselves in the Zoom meetings. We just regret that we can't have a glass of wine together after each meeting, but maybe it will come back. So we have a lot of discussions between the clusters to share our best practices, our knowledge. Here's a list of, from the Partners Can Expense perspective, what we can envisage of activities for today and the future. Some discussions are well underway, and you see that they go into the basic functionalities of the services we can provide together and further develop together between the clusters. Again, COVID-19, at the bottom of the slide, you see the COVID-19 data initiative, to which many of us have participated. It's a good example of how reactive we can be and how we can actually pull this together and do science together. Cluster Partners Can Expand will go into EOSC Future with the science projects, 2 of them, which will bring along the services we have developed and what we generalize them to make them available to everybody, but also get everybody in Partners Can Expand accustomed of using them. So we have to apply these services, and there is nothing better than have a real use case, which is important and relevant, for which the scientists in our facilities have a high interest of working on them. So this will take place and will allow us to collect the feedback and improve the services while we are going along, and make sure that the expertise and the results are shared with everybody and then improved. The future role of the science clusters, we are representing a very large user community and also diverse communities. Now, this is a good starting point. So we connect these communities to EOSC, make sure that they know what EOSC is. Now, we are all facing commonly the data challenge. And we have to keep a close eye on this, because this is extremely important. We must ensure that the publication, the time to publication is kept, if not reduced, and provide a user-friendly environment. And we have the desirable common activities between the clusters, which extend far beyond the projects itself, and we have to see how we can actually continue in the best possible way working on these common challenges, such that we bring them forward. And here is the takeaway message from Partners and Expense, that the scientific communities of our analytical facilities need an EOSC which enables seamless interaction with open data for open science. So thank you very much for your attention. For the project coordinators of Partners and Expense. And obviously, I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Rudolf. And I know Patrick is also here, and Andy, good to support you on this presentation. I'd like to ask the following one. So you decide who would like to take that. How will PANOSC and Expand sustain the solutions they are offering?
I try to explain it. Obviously, the stable point of operation is with the research infrastructures. The research infrastructures have the stable budget, and they are sustained by the national funding organizations, or in our case, by our international partnership. And we have to ensure that within the leaks of photon sources and neutron sources, we establish the memorandum of understandings defining the resources required for each of the outputs from from Partners and Expense. Beyond that, we will also, of course, try to be successful for new Horizon Europe funding opportunities, because the story is not yet finished. We know that we have challenges linked to artificial intelligence and machine learning, which need a concerted effort. And I think that in Europe, here we have to catch up a bit in comparison to our colleagues and friends in the United States. So there is a lot of work also in front of us, but the main message here is that the research infrastructures have to sustain most of the outputs of the cluster project.
Okay, thank you. In fact, linked also to, I think Nicholas mentioned it this morning, about there are a lot of the research infrastructures that are actually established legal entities themselves. So, working outside of the specific science cluster and working in parallel in other activities too. Thank you. So with that, I think we're going to pass now to our final cluster presentation. I'll pass the floor to Carsten Thiel. So Carsten, could you perhaps start putting your slide deck up? Carsten is the Chief Technical Officer of CESDA ERIC, the Consortium of Social Science and Data Archives, and he also serves as the technical coordinator of the SHOCK project, which he will be presenting today. So over to you, Carsten. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Silvana. So I'd like to introduce the SHOCK cluster project, the Social and Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud. Similar to the others, it's an EOSC 04 2018 project, a research and innovation action. We have 48 partners, 23 of those are beneficiaries with a lot of LTPs attached to it. It's a number of social sciences and humanity ESFRI landmarks and projects. It runs for 30 months and will come to the end in the next spring for just under 14.5 million. The objectives are to create what will be the social sciences and humanities part of the European Open Science Cloud. And the idea here is to reuse the things we've built over the past years through the ESFRI project, through our previous collaborations, and make open science and FAIR principles become real. And a lot of this work is going into standards, making sure that our metadata is compatible across the infrastructures, and this gets even more complicated when we're crossing disciplines. We're working on common catalogs and solutions for access control. There's lots of work on semantic technologies, and of course, a lot goes into training. The idea is to connect the existing infrastructures, also connect to new infrastructures and build new services on top of the existing one, generalizing some, that already exist to a wider applicability. And most importantly, very importantly, we're also looking at establishing some appropriate governance model for these services, in particular when it comes to services that are no longer operated and targeted for the use cases of a single infrastructure, but to the wider applicability of the cluster and even beyond into EOSC. So looking at the partners I mentioned, we have the ESFRI landmarks, we have SESTA, DARIA, Clarine, ESS, Share, and IRIS. We're engaging with stakeholders through the EOSC Association, Trust IT on the communications, and we have also a number of research communities represented by universities, by research organizations, national research organizations from a number of countries. And we also have some commercial partners on the technology providing side involved in the project. Now, when we're looking at the ESFRI infrastructures, we have 3 from the social sciences and 3 from the humanities working on each on their individual targeted mission. The European Social Survey and Share, the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement, are surveys that have been run over multiple years for the last 2 decades. So a number of repeated surveys have been issued so that data becomes comparable over time for across Europe. SESTA as a consortium of European social science data archives representing a number of national, or combining a number of national archives that have lots of social science survey data, but also other kinds of social science research data available and making this data available across Europe. When we're moving on to the humanities, we have Clarine working on the language resources, IRIS on cultural heritage, whereas DARIA has a more broader vision of encompassing lots of services for the humanities in general. And you see that there's very different applicability, because tools you can apply to language, you cannot necessarily apply to digitized physical artifacts, let alone to surveys, as I mentioned earlier, from the social sciences. So what's coming out of the SHOCK project is roughly 40 services, tools, products that will potentially also be applicable across domains, while they have, of course, been developed with a very specific target in mind. Among these tools and services is our virtual collection manager. It allows to combination tools and data. It's ultimately a list of things that come together for a specific research question. And this list, this collection itself can then be published and assigned a persistent identifier so that it itself becomes citable. So have a citable collection of data. Then I mentioned we're working on conversion between metadata standards across disciplines, across the social sciences, across the humanities, and also between social sciences and humanities, where we often have to go over to generic standards where a lot of information is lost if you're not careful. The Aioli platform, one of the services coming out that will be used for documenting and annotating cultural heritage artifacts. And we're also working a lot on trust support. Here we're looking in particular of certification for trusted repositories. So the core trust seal is one of the things. And this is, of course, a sort of support mechanism that we're offering for archives and for repositories to get help with their certification. The SSH open marketplace will be the social sciences and humanities gateway to EOSC. This was mentioned earlier that we're working on getting the services that come out of EOS delivered to the researchers in the social sciences and humanities, but also including things that are maybe not on the level that they qualify for a fully professional, production-ready EOSC service, but are nonetheless of very high importance and very good usability for individual researchers. A lot of work goes into training. One of the problem, or there's 2 directions we're looking at. One of them is making the training material visible with our training discovery toolkit that will allow us, or will allow researchers to find training material targeted to specific topics. And we're also looking into a directory of trainers where you can find trainers that can deliver a training for you, because the training material itself is only half the thing you need. You also need someone who explains it to you, who delivers it to your audience. The website as an entry point to the European Ocean Science, we're still seeing that there is a lot of need to explain of why a researcher should engage with EOSC and how this could happen. Potential collaboration activities here, we have two directions. One is within the clusters or across the clusters. On the technical side, processing of sensitive data in the cloud. This is particularly a problem in the social sciences. I mentioned it earlier, surveys on health, surveys on social life over decades. A lot of the information in these surveys is potentially problematic. There are other surveys where this is even more of an issue, data that is identifiable to individuals. And when it comes to health and aging, this is very quickly very sensitive data. So there's lots of problems attached to this question. AI was mentioned a few times. One of the issues we're looking into here is collaborating together with Instruct from the life sciences to generalize a system that is already connected to the life science AI to our solutions in the social sciences, so that we can use a platform that's been developed with a specific use case in one cluster in mind to also apply to other clusters to provide access to, in this case, for now, physical research instruments, including things like safe rooms or physical objects in our domain. Fair testing tools, also this was mentioned. What we're seeing is that the understanding of what does it mean to be fair in practice, how do you ensure your repository will actually be classified as fair by everyone and not just by the people who designed it. For this, there's a few solutions coming up, including the Fuji tool from the Fair's Fair project that has gotten some traction in recent months. And we think this is a way forward in certifying also repositories. We have Core Trust Seal for all the processes behind it, and then testing tools, technical solutions that make sure the repository also behaves in a machine-readable, accessible way. Data citation, very big problem in making sure that data in the social sciences is correctly, and in the humanities as well, is correctly cited, in particularly because we don't have the possibility of enforcing it when people pass through our gates, as we're providing access usually online. There's questions of how to set up virtual environments. We're seeing lots of possibilities on remote access solutions here as well. And within the EOS Future project, there are some pilots and pathfinders looking into this. It was mentioned earlier in COVID, for instance. Training with certifications. I've mentioned our directory of trainer. Finding someone who can deliver your training material. We think there's also a question of how do you know that this is the person you want to deliver your training? How do you know this is the authority to deliver your training? Some sort of certification for our directory and making this broadly applicable with our, beyond our cluster. On the other side, delivering to EOSC via the science projects, we have the data spaces. There is obvious COVID, where also a lot of social sciences studies are being held. We have ecosystems, biology, economy. In cultural heritage, there is overlap. This was mentioned by Rudolf, I believe. And we have democracy, linked open data and knowledge graph, making the data not just from within science, but making this compatible with it out there in the open domain by other organizations and institutions. And there we're also looking into co-creation opportunities with international organizations. The DDI Alliance, who's been developing standards for the social sciences and with their upcoming cross-domain standard. The Research Data Alliance, of course, and the Australian Research Data Commons, the OECD. Of course, there's questions of how to run infrastructure, how to provision infrastructure. Things of these are looked at within EOSC, with OCRA and other initiatives, but we also have, we'll also be looking into Gaia X collaboration opportunities on specific of these teams, and citizen science in general is a very important topic. When it comes to the EOSC Association and the European Commission, we believe that within the Horizon Europe work program on research infrastructures, there will be lots of opportunities to improve on the things that we have already built so far. The working groups and the General Assembly within the association should also be involved here. Towards the ESFRI and the ERIC forum, we believe that as infrastructures, collaboration in this forum is very important. More on the organizational matters, on structural problems and hindrances that we need to overcome. And of course, there is the alignment with the European Commission, RTD and Connect Directorate Generals. So looking back at our key exploitable results, I mentioned some of them earlier. Some of these are potentially or very clearly multidisciplinarily applicable. Some of them are more applicable to specific use cases within the cluster. If we're looking at on the top right at Ariadne Plus, a solution for improving archaeological data management is a very clearly domain-specific solution. Verifying translations for survey questions with the automatic verification tool, again, a very domain-specific but different domain. Knowledge graph in electoral studies. There we're going into knowledge graphs. It's for electoral studies, so at this level it is domain specific, but knowledge graphs are emerging everywhere, and we believe there's lots of possibilities in connecting this then beyond the domain. Ethnic and migrant minority survey will be a very domain specific survey, but it will provide us information that's very relevant for other economical and socio-economical issues. The Open Training Toolkit will of course include training that comes from our domain, but that doesn't mean that it's not applicable across domain. When it comes to research data management, there's lots of overlap with other domains. Ontologies were also mentioned earlier. Of course, there are a number of ontologies in the social sciences that we're working on, and the metadata conversion hub is primarily focused on conversion within our domain, but by doing that, we're already engaging with external entities like the RDA to make it applicable across domains. The training directory was one of the services I mentioned earlier. This, as a directory solution, will certainly be applicable across the domains. The virtual collection registry, where you can cite your collection, will be very cross-usable. The Aioli platform for artifacts as well. And the web sample management system for cross-national surveys. While surveys are very social science specific, we still believe that this solution will enable us to collaborate with other infrastructures. And finally, at the very top, the switchboard, which is a platform that allows combining data and services with each other by matching the input of one service to the output of another service or the format of a data file that you're already having, to allow a researcher ultimately within the SHOC open marketplace at the very center to find the data, to find the service, and to identify which data with which service will allow them to address which research question. And with that, thank you for your attention.
Perfect timing, Carsten. Thank you very much. Very interesting input, especially around cross in terms of democracy, cultural heritage you're referring to. I do actually want to touch upon the multidisciplinary aspect that you're showing in your last slide, that the other clusters have also shown, and how your tools can be transformed into applications for other disciplines. So I know Ron's also on the course, so decide who you want to take that. Ron, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, perhaps. Thank you, Silvana. Perhaps I start and then Carsten can add on this. In a way, Carsten already gave an example of this AAI that is developed by Instruct. And what we will do in this EOS Future project is CESA and Instruct will work on bringing this to a higher level where other disciplines can use this also, or at least apply this in the social sciences and humanities. And I think a key item is to bring together 2 or more organizations from different domains to work together on this. We see this in other applications that are being developed, for example, in the EOS core. And also the solution not to have this on a specific website, but now it's getting technical, so I'll leave it to Carsten, but to have this as APIs that you can implement instead that you should go to a website to implement it. But Carsten, perhaps you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's based on the platform that Instruct has been using for many years and developing themselves to provide research access to their facilities, usually microscopes and other biology infrastructures. But we see similarities to access to physical resources located in some secure room at our data archives, or in the next step to web platforms. And part of this is, of course, ensuring that this platform can follow the workflow, because the workflows have to be implemented. What do you actually need to do if you want to apply to access for this data set or for this physical machine? What questions need to be answered? Who will be reviewing these questions? And then how do you actually get the access? Is this just via the web, or is it physical access? All these kinds of procedures, and making these compatible across the domain will be the efforts that we're looking into.
Thank you. There is some comments coming into the chat. Carsten, I do have another question actually for you. It's posed by Richard Dennis. Can you give an update on your efforts regarding the Dataverse data repository and how it's incorporated with the SHOC infrastructure?
Yeah, so Dataverse is an open source repository solution developed at Harvard. We have within CESTR and now also within SHOC been working actively to contribute back to the Dataverse project to make the platform more usable for applications in the social sciences and humanities. That includes making the metadata profiles and metadata standards that we're using some of the default options within Dataverse. There is not a specific effort to provide Dataverse as a service through the SHOC project at this point. We're more looking into making the platform reusable by others in a way that is compatible with the needs of social sciences and humanities. Providing Dataverse as a service is a next step that we're looking into, but it will most likely not be an outcome directly out of SHOC. And this was also not the intention. It's more on figuring out how the solution that lots of archives, universities, even in national efforts, for instance, here in Norway, but also in Denmark, there are big Dataverse instances that are being run for lots of institutions. Making the software compatible with the needs of our domain was the primary aim. And all of these changes are being done in a way that they are being merged back to the official releases by Harvard.
Okay, Carsten, thank you very much for that. We have a minute left, a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to perhaps go back to Kostas for a question, as he's managed to obviously listen to all of the 5 cluster presentations. And I wanted to ask you, Kostas, from an EC policies perspective, do you see that gathering larger scientific communities could be a way to address European data spaces through a cross-disciplinary approach? And if you want to comment on that, thank you.
You refer to the European data spaces in the put forward in the European data strategy.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what it says and what the intention is these are thematic spaces in I think 9 different areas, from transportation and agriculture to to everything. Many of these have a research component, and we have agreed that EOSC is the horizontal layer that connects these data spaces together through regarding their research content. So obviously the infrastructures here with that many of the infrastructures and data clusters that we have been talking about have a very significant contribution to make in that respect in many different ways. I think for some of the examples shown by Carsten in the last presentation, would be relevant to some of these spaces, for instance. I don't know if that was the question.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely, Costas. Thank you very much. We're coming up to midday, so the floor passes to you, Giovanni, on the ESFRI Science Cluster's position statement on expectations and long-term commitment in open science. So I'll pass the floor back to you, Giovanni. Thank you.
Do you see the slide? Yes, Ivana. Okay, so after such, do you hear me? Yes, correct?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. So after such an interesting journey through the 5 cluster presentations with extremely engaging contributions, I have the pleasure to speak on behalf of the 5 by highlighting some narrative, the content of the position statement document 2. And I will report briefly about the statements and in particular the sort of vision for the future and a potential work plan. Allow me to introduce some short glossary, briefly reminding that when we talk about data, we talk about any digital object, including software. In the document and in the following, I will make reference to virtual research environment. What I mean with this term is a thematic, collaborative, digital environment where scientists are going to uptake open science, enabling the community to make research, but also addressing other actions like training, innovation, cross-fertilization. Is a little bit not really the opposite, but it is really something more than a static marketplace. EOSC Association, you probably know, is the legal entity established recently, aiming at the implementation, the co-designed implementation of the European Research Data Commons, where data are fair and also open as possible. ESFRI is the strategic research and innovation agenda of the European Open Science Cloud, and the document which was recently delivered, that is the result of a large survey in the ecosystem where the clusters individually also participated. Then we have been talking about data spaces. So Costas has presented this infographic just to remind you that this is part of the European strategy for data, with the aim also of make data essential resources for economic growth, competitiveness, innovation, job creation, and something that is important for us, also societal progress in general. I will come at the end of the talk, I will come back to this point, but this is something that is used often in the document, in the presentation. And then a preamble that is extremely important for all of us. Our vision is shaped on the lessons that we have learned over these 2 years. We are at the midpoint of our programs, but it will still be shaped in progress. There are 2 fundamental things to announce. First of all, decluster by itself is one of the most effective, innovative tools that the European Commission has instructed and supported. And we need to pursue the successful and effective cooperative approach therein. The sustainability of the science cluster is a question that we do address to research infrastructures, to the communities, while we believe that the sustainability of EOSC for science depends on the maturity of what we build, of our virtual research environment, and a set of a few of our core services. Now, I come to, first of all, 3 positions clear that we stated in the document. One concerning the general role of the clusters as, first of all, engines for interdisciplinarity. We have experienced, and this is something that we have to underline as well, that the cross-fertilization, structured cross-fertilization that the cluster has allowed has also provided bridges against the technical and sociological barriers to bring scientists together. We have today the potential to shape further the EOSC agenda of participating in this. And also we discuss it all together, and then we think that we also can play a role for the operationalization of the European research area in the future. Then we want to share with you also another thing that is clear, felt everywhere in the clusters. There is a momentum that we don't want to lose. And actually, I like to say that I see three momenta. The first momentum is the top-down, because the ESFRI research infrastructure legal entities are joining, have joined, and they want to keep joined into the future for the next challenges. Bottom-up momentum of the concerned scientists that are willing to pursue this co-development that we are building, but we go step by step, and we have a long path ahead of us. And then I like to also underline that there is something emerging horizontally, university institutes that could leverage and are going to leverage the interdomain potential to be fully exploited around new academic training schemes. And here you see there are bridges that we are exploring in the next months about the international training network, European training network, so also Federation of University, everything based on this, on research based on data. The second position concerns the fact that we represent a sort of unique capacity to address some challenges in open research data, because are in the same time data producers and consumers. And you have seen in the presentation that we also developed a key part of mid-level multidisciplinary tools and platforms that are pillar for EOSC. It is also evident that the track record of integrating infrastructure is a significant asset for EOSC, and we believe that if we see that the majority of the EOSC Association members are European Union member states, university and research institute, science and support of research communities is the major aim, according to our view, of EOSC. It is important to do something that is useful for researchers. The third position concerns science clusters in scientific and research infrastructure communities. I think I'm going to repeat myself in the sense that we know that there is the sentence of the long term, the objective is the web of fair data and services for science. We like to emphasize that we need to have a sort of effective community governed open science common platforms, co-developed, where dynamically we expose, we publish and make findable the user stories, the workflows, and also support further the cooperation to advance in the research. With the same, and this is important, with the same, with the goal of enhancing the researchers' participation, and in the same time, in collaboration with the European Commission to support a coordinated work of the e-infrastructures in Europe, we joined the EOSC Future project. You have learned about different science projects that are proposed by each cluster and intercluster, but not forgetting also the capacity of rapid and efficient platform for responding to important societal challenges like the recent COVID-19 projects. The common statements of the 5 clusters are along 4 main directions, with the wish to operate and adapt their thematic open science resources, making science always central for society, of course, but for excellence in research. Leveraging cross-cutting and cluster cross-domain projects connected with the European sectoral data spaces is something that we want to explore, and we have been discussing today. This providing training, committing to education and engaging citizen science that is already part of our current work program, and this has to be kept. Exploring also the way, of course, to translate the excellence in data research into economic value. When we talk about in the document, and I underline here again, the long-term vision, we want to envisage a sustainability of the clusters. We can consider the cluster becoming a platform infrastructure. First of all, we are not referring to any new legal entities. It's just the way to find a word that can work for everybody. But of course, you have learned that we have the idea of a hub in ENVI-FAIR, of the league in PANOSC. Then there are already existing ERICs or existing infrastructure, or as in the case of ESCAPE, going towards really a platform, a federation for the long-term approach. This long-term has to target the operation exploitation of the community-based virtual research environment, and then combining from one side the steering of the research infrastructures and the participation of the consortium from a bottom-up also approach of university and institutes. The platform internally and collectively will start to define a set of a series of new task forces. And what I wanted to say to you now is this: we are clear evidence that we can really be enough strong to drive action towards a new focus in the framework, of course, of Horizon Europe. One more, let's say, message or aspect to debate is that for the future, we want to, and we support, obviously, the EOSC Association mandate. While many of our partners institutes are members of the EOSC Association and even in the governance, the science cluster would bring, in addition, the collective scientific community expectation. And I think that we need a direct link with the EOSC Association Board of Directors to provide the survey about science and technology from the disciplines and for participating correctly to the evolution of the EOSC roadmap. Now, concerning the work plan, we are providing to you the following preliminary exercise, a sort of rough view of how we see the pathway of the clusters toward their own sustainability in more or less stage 2 and 3 of EOSC area. Obviously, there is a prompt need and opportunity to support the science clusters within the Horizon Europe framework. But what we see that we have to target altogether, first of all, some general objectives for consolidation of our VRE, and then going towards the few core services. We have to have, in the same time, in parallel, specific objectives, produce for the very first time relevant scientific results from the cluster, from the fairness environment, increase the number of research infrastructures, not because it's a mandate, because we are assisting that we have new, even world-class project knocking on our doors, and we are happy for that, but we have to be also ready for that. Enhance researchers' uptake of open science and widening dimension, we said about new focuses. Then the third step is the one which brings us towards a sustained model that are operational objectives, the platform infrastructures, continuous promotion, extension, and hosting of inter-domain fair science project that will be new open science objectives. Now, the way we see is to organize ourselves for these three classes of objectives through two major complementary approaches that we call it, as you've seen also in the previous presentation, Pillar A and Pillar B. The Pillar A concerns from GO to SO, intercluster common data service co-developments. And this is really targeting activities for consolidation of the VRAs, envisaging intercluster project is relevant for interoperability and commons, but we need to consolidate and make operative the major services that are the structure of each EOSC cell for each domain before being, let's say, sustainable also for interoperability, inter-domain project. And this is why the longer term, the goal is the few core services per cluster to become part of the sustainable core services of EOSC. Pillar B, that is really challenging, is moving from specific objective to long-term objective, operative objectives, is delivering content to EOSC, scientific content. And the way we can do is through a matrix approach, based first of all on two methods. One is open science projects, completely hosted by our platforms to continue bridging barriers to open science within a large scientific community, to leverage the pan-European cluster action even more globally, and also for regional initiatives. And here there are a few examples that also have to be considered, not only in terms of regional funds of the European Union, but also questioning about bridging with the European Research Council schemes. Then the cross-cluster open science projects are envisaged to be tackled by focusing on topical aspects within one cluster, supported by complementary contribution from all clusters. This is the way, naturally, we see the interdisciplinary in open science, to leverage also the intercluster coordination, again, for the regional initiatives emerging from the open science projects. The matrix is completed then through a series of vertical missions, laying in the capacity of the ESFRI research infrastructure partners, wide innovation potential with industry, including SMEs, affirmation and extension of a prominent Europe role. We want to work more international. We are already international with our world-class projects. Structuring education, training by doing. It is not a question of using the power of data or the potential of data to build a new profile of researchers, but also to educate, to insert young students in the work environment, whatever it is, public or private. Supporting science and technology policy for society. This is something that a structured cluster can also consider, as well as the data cloud business capacity by engaging with GAIA-X. The science clusters would explore how to commit with European Commission for also the European data spaces. I know we have had some examples, more clear for some, more evident for some disciplines, for the European data space that, as Kostas was saying, are really sectoral. But I know that you are wondering, Giovanni, examples. We have already had some clear examples. The exercise that I'm presenting to you, apart the infographic from the European Commission about the European strategy for data, a common European data space, and a single market for data, by sector, allow me with some filter, because an external observer can also say that the fundamental physics has nothing to do with business or data for economy and for society. This is wrong. We are all concerned. For instance, industrial and manufacturing, the ESFRI facilities like PANOS, Escape, but also EOSC Life support the European Union industry because of the great potential and the innovation activities that are conducted therein, but also have a capacity in allowing global coordination for innovation through data. One example that I think it is real to be taken now is the quantum computing as a service, but as well as a coordination of technology R&D concerning quantum technologies largely. Then you also have seen that it is transversal all over the classes and the disciplines. Algorithms, standards for Industry 4.0 can be linked to such developments, but also artificial intelligence and, last but not least, the high-performance computing. In Escape, for instance, domain, we are going to converge towards the solution to link the data management and the exploitation of the high-performance computing that are platforms exploited mainly by industries. Then we can see about the Green Deal. Of course, the data are more aligned with the goal, or the space is more aligned with the ENVI-FAIR data, but there is the capacity of all clusters to join in support of circular economy. Let's think about the construction of a new research infrastructure that have links with the geophysics, with environment implication. Public administration and finance, there are a series of actions done by, or can be done potentially by Shock and with their data marketplace, but also data to improve accountability of public spending for research, management, sustainability of big science research infrastructure through a sort of analysis ex ante of the socioeconomic impact model of these research infrastructure. I don't think I have to spend words about the health sector with the central capacity of EOSC Life, but let me also remind that there is a clear potential link of data coming from nuclear, synchrotron light and neutron facilities for preventing and treating disease. So the potential is there. We want to talk about energy, the cross-sector sharing of data for a unifying forward-looking approach of any big science facility is there. We have to explore and establish practices and through data and knowledge for energy efficiency, for water management, and so on and so forth. I don't spend any more about skills, but because you know that what we are already doing within our own work program in the cluster, we are already addressing the education and the training for the labor market needs. I'm at the conclusion of this overview of our position statement, and I like to summarize saying that the position statement on better the vision of clusters is about 4 out many keywords. I have chosen the following: expectation, because we accelerate the discovery and increase scientific value, enable opportunities offered by the digital revolution. Commitment, because we shape, operate platforms for data interoperability, because of the goal of sustaining the federation of research infrastructure for excellent science, widen impacts of open data science. And then cooperation, you have seen the availability and the proposal for a clear link with the EOSC Association and consolidate cooperation with the European Commission, the interdomain and cross disciplines, the cooperation with the SMEs that are already participating for co-development, and we can do more, and society at large we have demonstrated. And then inclusiveness, because we said that we are attracting more thematic and emerging research infrastructures. There will be also an update of the roadmap of ESFRI projects. Lead a regional as well as international alliance in science. And then we never forget that there are also regional dimension and cooperative dimension among European Union member state university, institutes, and our fellow citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Concise overview. I hope I'll repeat again something I said at the beginning of the meeting. The position statement is available in Indico for you to download. Okay, so it is there so you can see all of the statements indicated there. Now, I don't know whether any other of our expert panelists from the clusters would like to add any comment at this stage? Any of our participants? I'm going through the chat now. This is some very good exchanges through the questions and answers. I'd like to pick up actually something that Francois Geneva has written. So thank you, Francois, nice to have you with us. In response to Martina, to recognize the work of the people who also contribute to make FAIR possible by developing the required disciplinary standards, formats, and semantics. I also like something that, I can't remember who wrote this now, perhaps Claudia Alan, who was referring to Carsten's answer of integrating solutions instead of creating new ones. These are applicable in many areas. Examples of 2RI showing that it works are case studies worth supporting. And in fact, we've seen in the presentations today how the clusters are giving concrete examples of practical take-up and usage. And also from Giovanni's last slide, the actual array of different stakeholders that we do see, which is encouraging. So this is a world that everyone can play and work in. Okay, so I think it's fitting to introduce now our next speaker, but before I do, it's also linked. Oh, I thought I was lost there. It's linked to a statement that Michel Schupper indicated this morning to remind you that there's the signature ceremony of the Memorandum of Understanding of the EOSC European Partnership on the 23rd of June on the occasion of the RNI Days, and that will be signed then. So with this statement and with this happening, I'd like to introduce now Maria Luisa Lavitrano, so thank you for joining us. I know today's been very busy for you, who's the EOSC Association Director. Those of you who aren't familiar with Maria Luisa's bio, she's a full professor of pathology, Director of Molecular Medicine Unit of the Executive Masters in Management of Research Infrastructures at Milano Bicocca University. So we're delighted to have Maria Luisa with us. If you'd like to start pulling out your slides, Maria Luisa, who's going to deliver a statement on behalf of the EOSC Association on advancing open science. Thank you very much, Maria Luisa, and the floor to you.
Thank you, Silvana, and also thank you to Giovanni for inviting me on behalf of the EOSC Association. I am very glad to have participated to this workshop actually, and also to have seen how was great the advancement and the success of the cluster. So now I'm here to tell you about the EOSC Association and the role in advancing open science. EOSC is expected to serve approximately 2 million researchers in Europe, and progressively to expand its user base to include the wider public sector and the private sector. The shared vision between the European Commission, the member states, and the large community is building the EOSC ecosystem collaboratively with all stakeholders through a co-programming partnership. We heard that the MOU will be signed in a few days, as the best instrument to collectively achieve knowledge circulation, diffusion, and uptake in a revitalized European research area. The new governance model, agreed with the EU countries for the next EOS implementation phase after 2020, will be tripartite, including the EU, represented by the Commission, the European research community, represented by the EOSC Association, and EU countries and countries associated with the Horizon Europe, represented through the steering board. The vision, the contribution of the EOSC Association is going to develop in the EOSC ecosystem is the web of fair data and related services. The fact is that in the EOSC ecosystem, there will be more contribution coming from the other partner stakeholders to reduce fragmentation by federating existing research infrastructure, enable interdisciplinary research to address societal challenges, open science, to support open science and contribute to the digital single market, offer the EU researchers the digital resources they need to practice open science, stimulate the emergence of a competitive EU cloud sector, and ultimately to give Europe a global lead in research data management. Europe has all the expertise needed to progress rapidly in the development of this EOS ecosystem, but it needs to bring additionality and directionality at the European, national, and institutional level in order to direct future research and innovation efforts and stimulate deployment and adoption. With the initial phase of the EOSC initiative ended in 2020, Europe now needs to strengthen and accelerate the development and implementation of EOSC to engage more widely with multiple stakeholders and to coordinate and synchronize the multiple relevant activities in the field that are still too fragmented among member states' national plans and research communities. In building the EOSC and developing the EOSC ecosystem, 3 overarching objectives must be achieved, and these are also the priorities for the EOSC implementation stage 1. Open science practices and skills are rewarded and taught, becoming the new normal. Standard tools and services allow researchers to find, access, reuse, and combine results. Sustainable and federated infrastructure enable open sharing of scientific results. These objectives form part of a multidimensional matrix known as the EOSC Objective 3, which also identify the main problems, barriers, and benefit. In addition to that, a set of guiding principles has been agreed, which will help position EOSC within Horizon Europe and shape its development. The overarching principle for deploying actually the EOSC within the Horizon Europe and shape its development is that research has to be at the center of the EOSC initiative. Engagement with research communities is therefore fundamental to understand their requirements and ensure that the way in which EOSC operates and the services are offered directly benefit the researchers. Placing research communities at the center will be guided by the following additional principles. Multi-stakeholder approach. This is very important. EOSC will succeed if and only if it follows a multi-stakeholder approach. In all openness, in other words, EOSC will ensure research artifacts to be as open as possible, as closed as necessary. And of course, according to the FAIR principle, research artifacts need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And federating existing infrastructure, very important. Machine actionability is also an important item to mention, especially nowadays that the larger data set can only be handled by machines. Now machines can read them, can understand them, can also act on them. Therefore, this is very important. Building on existing research data infrastructure, EOSC will grow through a series of iterations. The objective of the first iteration is establishing a minimum viable EOSC, which will enable the federation of existing and planned research data infrastructure for the benefit of publicly funded researchers to access open, available, fair data and services. This minimum viable ESCOL shall deliver the core SRIA objectives and provide fundamental support for open science in Europe. Research-oriented services, trustable open science, support for collaboration, and sustainability of EOSC. And actually, a functioning EOSC can only emerge from a coordinated effort of Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, and national and institutional activities. The grand vision of the EOSC Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda is just the summation of activities at both the European, national, and institutional level. And coordination of these activities is essential and has to be well-defined and managed. The EOSC Association will take a critical role in this process. EOS Association was established as a legal entity, an international non-profit association, ESBL, founded in Brussels in July 2020, to represent those eligible stakeholders wishing to formalize their role in the European Open Science Cloud. As 4 founding members, César, Jean, Gar, and CISIC, in the first General Assembly on December 2020, elected the president and the board. Now, the EOSC Association includes 153 members and 63 observers, research performing, research funding, and service providing organization with a ratio of 62 8 and 30% as of May 21. Therefore, kind of a well-balanced presence of stakeholders. And it's interesting to see, looking at the geographical distribution, that there is a great interest in the southern countries to EOSC. The board, you know, all these nice faces: Karen Lüben, Klaus Stockeman, Suzanne de Michel, Sarah Jones, Ignacio Blanquer, Ronald Byrne, Bob Jones, Willem Widmer, and actually myself. The EOSC Association mission in the long run is advancing the European Open Science Cloud to accelerate the creation of new knowledge, inspire education, spur innovation, and promote accessibility and transparency. These are beautiful words, but we make it concrete by providing a single voice for advocacy and representation from the broader EOSC stakeholder community in Europe, and also promoting the alignment of European Union research policy and priorities with activities coordinated by the association through the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, the SRIA, and to ultimately enable seamless access to data through interoperable services that address the entire research data life cycle, from discovery to storage, management, analysis, and reuse across borders and scientific disciplines. But this will not happen tomorrow. There will be some time to implement, and the collaboration of many stakeholders. We are doing several activities to have the association up and running, but let's concentrate on the activities we are doing right now. We start working, structuring advisory groups and task forces. And this is to allow association members and also others to help steer the implementation of the EOSC. Groups should liaise with the EOSC project. Many of them already started, others will come. And important is to offer feedback and advice to the EOSC Association. Important to identify strategic gaps and areas for investment, to give especially input to the SRIA, and mainly to help us to formulate the future version of the SRIA, especially with respect to the plan, actually. The EOSC Association member can propose and lead groups. External also can be members. And also there are task forces groups within these EOSC group, advisory groups, who undertake activities to implement a certain aspect of EOSC according to their topics. The advisory groups and task force, you have here the list: implementation of EOSC, technical challenges on EOSC, metadata and data quality, research careers and curricula, sustaining EOSC. I have no time at this moment to go into details, but of course we are available to go in more deeply in this, and also you are invited to participate to the next EOSC association workshop next week, where the advisory group and the task forces will be presented. These proposed topics, the topics were proposed on the basis of the outcome of previous governance, and also we have run a community consultations, and we revised also the task forces and advisory groups accordingly. Now, the role of science clusters in EOSC. What is our view? Our view is that science clusters, all of them, ENVI-FAIR, EOSC Life, ESCAPE, PANOSC, SHOCK, really have a central role in EOSC. They are making major contribution to EOSC, we listen today, as they are means of engaging research infrastructure and also their user communities. The EOSC roadmap foresees contribution from the science cluster that stretch beyond the lifetime of the science cluster project. And also the science cluster greatly contribute to the EOSC objectives. Here I've listed maybe the more important, but are not the only one. Engage with researchers and promote the adoption of open science practices by research communities. participate in the definition of standards and development of tools and services that allow researchers to find, access, reuse, and combine results, establish a sustainable and federated infrastructure, enabling open sharing of scientific results. All of these are very important. How clusters can link up with the EOSC Association. My suggestion is to have an active role in the advisory groups and task forces to help formulate the next version of the SRIA. It is important that we engage now. The next version of the SRIA will be delivered by the end of the year. There is a lot of room for contribution. The clusters will provide the scalable means for discipline input. And this is not only a political role, it's a mechanism to ensure that the SRIA is rooted in a scientific reality. And with this, I wish to close my presentation, and of course, I'm available to answer your question and to discuss these issues further. And also I want to ensure you that I will report all what I heard today to the board, and we will have time and occasion to discuss more, especially during the EOSC symposium, to which I invited you all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Maria Luisa, thank you very much for that, for those insights. Just some housekeeping quickly. The chat will be saved, so we will. For those of you who haven't managed to stay on for the whole morning, there've been some excellent questions and answers. So we'll make sure we collect all of that and put that in the dedicated workspace on Indico. You do have a question, but I would like to pose one, if I may, Maria Luisa. It's a good idea, you're saying, for the clusters to take an active role in the task forces to help contribute to the SRIA. And we've heard that that's also taken place with the previous EOS executive board from, quite a few of the clusters were involved in that. I'm thinking those who have signed up as EOS members, how could there be an activity that's then they're updated and aligned with what's happening with the achievements from the scientific clusters as well? Do you think that there could be a separate invitation or dedicated sessions that can take place to do that? Or well, I'll pass this question to you, Maria Luisa.
I think that considering the enormous role and the very important role that research infrastructure and clusters have in the EOSC development and also in the development of the European research area, there is room to discuss how to better interact and how to find a way for having a strict collaboration. Therefore, I think that this is something that really needs to be explored and discussed. But really my suggestion is to start working together with what we already build up at the moment. We should not really lose the momentum. So I really invite research infrastructure that are already involved, some of them, but also the cluster to contribute to the work that we are doing at the moment.
Okay, maybe the concluding remark, maybe this is something that can be picked up by the EOS Future project then to feed that bridge then, which might make, which there are tasks dedicated to this there, so that's useful. I do have a question from Andy Smith. Maria Luisa, any news on the time frame for opening of the nominations for the task forces? Do you have an update on that?
Task forces just finished the writing of the charters, and now we will discuss during the EOSC workshop the content with all the community, and we will revise everything inside the EOSC board, and then we will open for more contribution and more members to contribute to the task forces in June, July. Therefore, there will be room for more members to come in.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I see Sorry. I see a hand raised from Andreas. Floor to you, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria Luisa, for that very good overview. At the end of your presentation, you mentioned the engagement of the clusters in the EOSC and the EOSC Association. So far, none of the clusters, and I think this will be true for the near future as well, none of the clusters will have will be formed as a legal entity because we work on another basis. And in the case of ENRI-FAIR, for instance, we recommended to our participating research infrastructures, which are legal entities, to become a member of the association. So which tool do you see would work best for the science clusters to interact with the EOSC Association? Or which format may be the better word?
Well, as you know, the legal status of the association do not allow non-legal entities to be part, formal participants of the association. This is also the case of actually Elixir. Elixir, is an infrastructure, but is not a legal entity. They belong from the MBL, and since MBL is already actually a member of the EOSC Association, Elixir cannot be the second member, because in the association you can have only one member per organization. Therefore, Elixir, for instance, will participate through will be represented by one of their national node. So maybe the cluster could do the same, because there is this limitation at the moment to be really a member of the association. So maybe clusters, each cluster can be represented by one of the research infrastructure that contribute to the cluster and can act in the name of the cluster. This is one possibility.
Thank you, Andreas. Question from
this is for the formal way, yeah, but there are, of course, other non-formal way to participate, to contribute, and to collaborate.
Indeed, Silvana, if you just give me a few seconds to reply on this, I think, thank you, Maria Luisa, for the presentation and for answering our question. But I think that Maria Luisa stated two important new things today. The first, that she is declaring that it is important to explore how to link with the clusters overall and with each cluster independently on the individual participation of individuals of the classes in the different groups. She mentioned the administrative constraints, but Andreas was also underlining a question of communication channels. I think there are two levels that Maria Luisa is saying that is envisaging. One is the communication channel with the clusters to perform the surveys of our communities on our behalf, and also to bring up the requirements from researchers. And on the other side, for shaping the roadmap is up to you, up to the board of the EOSC Association to see how to extend the cooperation to the classes overall. But as Maria Luisa said, is something that has to be explored.
Giovanni, let me add something. The EOSC Association is a representative entity of several, research performing organization, research funding, research providing service providers. Our approach is a participatory approach. Really, we want to engage with the community. Now, research infrastructure and clusters are not only part of the community, are pillars of this community. Therefore, for sure, we will engage with you. No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. But we need to build up instruments, build up structures, build up ways how to collaborate. Now, what we are doing now is to work with our with the community through this advisory group. Advisory group means groups of people that really work hard to, to give input to the board. The board acts as a, a steering committee, but yeah, we are listening from the community.
Just a question in the chat, Maria Luisa Gergely from EGI. Is it expected, as in the past, that there will be representation, sort of one or two of the EOS projects would also contribute to these task forces?
One of the reasons why we launched these task forces is to link up with the already existing projects. Projects are developing and implementing tools and services and science. Therefore, as we as association, we need to link up with the work that has been done, that is being done by the project. And this is the reason why also we launched these task forces.
Okay, and then I think the last question, if I may, from Martina Romaniello, ESO. Luisa, many thanks for your presentation and insights. Something that I think I missed it are the test science projects. They're part of the test science projects. They're part of the EOS Future Work Program. There are already identified some that are going to be taken forward. And Martina's asking, what role do you see for them? I'm not sure whether you have a comment on that.
I'm not sure that I have understood the question. The question is...
yeah, in fact, I'm not actually sure whether I've understood the question, Maria Luisa. So sorry, Martino. Do you mean how they're important in light of what the EOS Association are trying to do, whether they can... Because we've actually identified that, Maria Luisa has highlighted and stressed that these are fundamental for the evolution of the association. So I don't know whether I've missed something. If you have, please indicate that in the chat and we'll pick that up. If not, I think we're coming up to time. I'd like to thank you, Maria Luisa, for the presentation. I'd like to thank all the speakers. You've been wonderful, extremely timely, with fantastic contributions. Thank you, Costas, as well. Thank you, Giovanni, and all for putting this together. I wish you a really fruitful discussion this afternoon. If you don't mind, can I just say quickly thank you to Matilda and Julie, Rita, Marique, Luigi, Gianluca, who have been heavily beavering away in the background, getting everything sorted. Apologies to Costas at the beginning for the manual next slide. That was my mistake. And with this, I'd like to then pass the floor for the wrap up and takeaways to Giovanni. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I've tried to put together a few wrap-up sentences and also takeaways coming from the clusters and as well as from the European Commission and the EOSC. So the first takeaway is from European Commission, from Costas. We need science clusters that are fully integrated with the EOSC and with their data fair by design, with emphasis on the I, on the interoperability. And interoperability is also the issue that is underlined by EOSC, I suppose EOSC Association or Secretariat, anyhow, interoperability, and it is clearly stated here, relevant research data within each ESFRI science cluster is already an important goal, would be great. Interoperability between the ESFRI science cluster would be marvelous. This is clear, stating also what we try also to communicate to all our attendees. We have these two steps in our agendas. We are trying to do our best also to be ahead of our schedule in the clusters and also let evolve all our work program in this sense. Then from the clusters, we can summarize from the ENVI fair. ENVI fair empowers environmental sciences to respond to grand societal challenges and reach EOSC open science targets through interoperability and interdisciplinarity. EOSC Life builds the operational processes that link up life science research outputs to the missions, objectives, and the open data targets of EOSC. ESCAPE brings the astronomy, particle, and nuclear physics communities together to build the next generation cross-domain facilities to answer fundamental questions about the universe and to bring our expertise on distributed exabyte scale data management, data stewardship, and analysis to the benefit of the EOSC. PANOSC, the scientific community is using the analytical facilities need an EOSC, which enables a seamless interaction with the open data for open science. And finally, the overall impact and then the result of SHOCK will be a social science and humanities data ecosystem in which researchers and other interested parties have seamless access to high quality data. Before coming to the wrap-up, I take the opportunity to thank the clusters, my colleagues, and also to have had the honor to represent them in this event. And then I try to summarize. I did my choice. If you wrap up concept of or ideas or results coming from the discussions that we have this morning. I retain that we underlined in a couple of presentations that science clusters is about people, skills, workflow, and user stories that we have to collect, we have to make fundable to support the global open science challenge. Whatever there will be a hub, platform, federation, the future cluster scheme has to deliver and operate such a capacity. The sustainability of such a capacity that has to be useful for researchers and open science at the end is up to the national institutes. It is impossible, I would like to underline, at constant budget for research. And I believe that scientists, all scientists will agree that fairness and open science should not be at the cost of excellent research in Europe. The sustainability of interdisciplinary project results depends on a sustained scheme. A series of sustained cluster platforms will let emerge then sustained open science projects in the future. Then one more comment that I see in the chat or in the presentation of one of the clusters. A perfect system to be implemented for EOSC for science does not exist. But as we used to do in scientific research, in science is more relevant to work on a researcher's use case and demonstrator, but of course with a vision, and we hope that we have demonstrated that we are building up our long-term vision. Then more or less what you have seen with the highlighting through the highlight of our position statement, we can say that we have involved the research infrastructure in the cluster that would like to see the clusters pursuing their programs and their cross-domain visions, contributing to EOSC and more largely to open science in Europe. And there is it is expected a plan to include this perspective in the Horizon Europe framework. Synergies with the European Commission and the EOSC Association are relevant, as well as alignment of association with communities' vision. And we have discussed right now with Maria Luisa this aspect. Therefore, cooperative link with the EOSC Association Board for Scientists requirements to be explored altogether. The European data spaces stimulate cross-disciplinary projects among the science cluster. We tried 5 classes and with the summary talk to propose some possibilities. It is clear that we need some topical concertation among clusters, the research infrastructure, the community, and explore with the European Commission a possible plan to integrate also the scientists in such challenges. And then I conclude saying that this workshop initiate a series of further occasions for periodical cross-border discussions, because the openness and inclusiveness towards all partners and the scientific community at large has to be preserved and supported for the future. I conclude by thank you all, thank the attendees, our guests, the speakers, and obviously the support team as Silvana has done, and I thank you also you, Silvana, for chairing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. In fact, there's a nice phrase that you might want to pick up in the chat from Michelle, who's written excellent research builds upon open source and fairness. There is no opposition in terms of approach. Nice. So with that, as I said, we'll collect the chat. Have a wonderful lunch. Have a wonderful summer, all of you. I hope we can all get back to seeing each other face to face. And thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon and weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.